All right, Chair, we are ready when you are.
Very good. Thank you. Good morning and welcome. At this time, I will call to order this virtual meeting of the committee to conduct an interim study of the requirements for reapportionment. This is our third meeting of the 2019-2020 interim. Thank you to everyone who is joining us online today, and we appreciate your participation, even if you can't see you in person. Members, we have grown accustomed to meetings using this new virtual format, but as a reminder, please remember to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Our policy analyst is going to call a roll today. So Mr. Stewart, would you go ahead with that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Calling roll, Senator Cancella.
I'm here.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Here.
Senator Gansert will be joining us a little later this morning. Senator Goycochea.
Here.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson will be logging back in shortly. Assemblyman Frierson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
And Chair Woodhouse.
Here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a quorum.
Yes, we do have a quorum. As you know, this study that we are undertaking is meant to set the stage for our redistricting efforts next year. So all in attendance and those listening over the internet, I thank you for your interest and your participation in this important study. Before we begin, of course, a few housekeeping items to review for the benefit of the audience and those wishing to speak. Although we are meeting remotely, many of the procedures remain the same. Meeting materials can be accessed on the committee's webpage. Anyone who would like to receive electronic notification and access to the committee's agendas, minutes, or final report can sign up on the Nevada Legislature's website. We will have two periods for public comment today, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker and will be taken over the telephone. There are 4 ways to provide public comment, all of which are listed on that agenda that is posted online. These include calling 669-900-6833, then entering the meeting ID, which is 922-6515-7439, followed by the pound sign. Or you may email your comments to redistricting@lcb.state.nv.us, or you can mail comments directly to the Research Division at 401 South Carson Street, Carson City, Nevada 89701. Or you may fax comments to 775-684-6600. As always, this meeting will be recorded and available on the legislature's website and is also available for live and archive viewing on the Nevada Legislature's new YouTube channel. As an overview, while our public commenters are being connected, I would like to say a few words about our work this interim. The genesis of this interim study is Senate Joint Resolution number 9 of the 2019 legislative session. This interim study is held every 10 years in advance of the redistricting session to help us prepare for the redistricting exercise. Since we last met in May, the COVID-19 pandemic has continued to dramatically change the way that we do our business during this interim. Because of the pandemic and 2 special sessions this summer, our meeting opportunities have been limited. As a result, the Legislative Commission gave this committee the authority to meet beyond our June 30th, 2020 meeting deadline and to continue its business into the fall. Today, we're going to be hearing from the Census Bureau on how they have responded to the pandemic and what it means for various enumeration deadlines and data delivery to the states. And of course, this is extremely interesting for us and pretty much directs our ability to carry out our duties. We will also hear from 2 of our local election administrators who will share with us some important matters to consider and election impacts when we embark on the actual task of redistricting. Also on the agenda today is a presentation from the National Conference of State Legislatures regarding their activities in monitoring and reporting on redistricting matters, as well as their assistance that is available to states regarding redistricting. Finally, our LCB redistricting staff will be presenting some overviews and demonstrations of various maps based on 2020 demographic estimates and reviewing redistricting rules from 2001 and 2011 so that we can consider any changes for 2021 if needed at our last meeting later this fall. Finally, before we begin public comment, I would like to thank all of our presenters who so graciously have agreed to participate virtually, and to our awesome broadcast and production services staff who have worked tirelessly to make sure that everyone is connected to this virtual meeting. And in fact, I understand from Mr. Stewart that many of our speakers today are going to be staying on the line to listen to the other speakers' presentation. So that is awesome. Thank you. We will now open, if BPS is ready, the first period of public comment. Each speaker will be provided 3 minutes. And we also encourage members of the public to submit their written testimony via one of the methods that we indicated on the agenda. LCB's BPS staff will be coordinating the public comment telephone line. So BPS staff, please add the first caller with public comment to the meeting. And we'll begin as soon as you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair. The public line is open and working, and there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have written public comment that we've received from Forrest Darby, so we'll make sure that that gets placed in our minutes going forward. So thank you very much. With that, we will move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item number 3, approval of the minutes of the meeting held on May 27th, 2020. Members, are there any questions regarding the minutes?
I make a motion.
Thank you. So we have a motion to approve the minutes from Speaker Frierson.
Second, Senator
Second
Goyke.
from Senator Cannizzaro. Since we're in a virtual, first of all, is there any discussion? And since we're in a virtual meeting, we will take the roll call vote, and we urge you to please say yes or no, so that it is very clear over the virtual connection as to what your vote is. So Mr. Stewart, would you call the roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The roll for minutes approval, Senator Cancella,
Yes.
Senator Cannizzaro,
Yes.
Senator Gansert, Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson,
Yes.
Assemblyman Frierson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
and Assemblyman Watts,
Yes.
and Chair Woodhouse.
Yes.
Thank you. Minutes approved.
Thank you. The motion passes. Next, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is an update of the United States Census Bureau activities, outreach, and census response rates in Nevada, with a discussion of the impacts of the COVID-19 on census operations. And we welcome Guillermo Gonzalez, who is the Congressional Partnership Specialist, and Brian Lee Berman, who is the Senior Partnership Specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau. Mr. Stewart will be handling their handouts, which should show up on your screen. So welcome, and please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to brief you this morning on Census Bureau operations. My name is Guillermo Gonzalez, and I serve as a congressional liaison with the U.S. Census Bureau. This morning, I will provide you with an overview of how the Census Bureau is adapting its operations to ensure a complete and accurate count by our statutory deadline, of December 31st, 2020. As we have emphasized since the pandemic arrived, the safety of our staff and the public is our top priority. We're thankful to our nation's health professionals, including those at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and all the hard work they are doing to promote health and safety during this time of uncertainty. I'd like to go to the first slide, if we may.
Yep.
Okay, do we have the first slide up?
Yes, it's ready.
Okay, and I apologize in advance for, I had some formatting challenges with my Census Bureau issued laptop, so apologies for that. But the first slide I'm talking about addresses our operational timelines, our original timeline and our pandemic adjusted timeline. As you'll see, our update leave was originally scheduled for March 15th through April 17th. In the update leave operation, this is where our Census Bureau employees go out to housing units that didn't have a mail address at their physical location, or the mail delivery information for the housing unit couldn't be verified. And in this operation, a Census Bureau employee physically delivers a 2020 census invitation to the housing units, and then they update the address list, our master address list. And then, of course, those households that don't respond, they will be visited by a Census Bureau enumerator during our non-response follow-up operation. Our service-based enumeration was originally scheduled for March 30th through April 1st. That got pushed out to September 22nd through the 24th. And then our non-sheltered outdoor locations operation, which was scheduled from March 31st to April 1st, that got pushed out to September 23rd through the 24th. Group quarters was scheduled, as you see, from April 2nd to June 5th. That got pushed out to September 3rd. Our transitory locations was scheduled from April 9th to May 4th. That got moved out from September 3rd through the 28th. And then our non-response follow-up was scheduled from May 13th through the July 31st, and that got moved out to August 9th through September 30th. And then the two items that you're probably most interested in is the delivery of apportionment data. That stayed the same by statute. That's December 31st, 2020, and of course that remains the same. The delivery of redistricting data was originally scheduled to be delivered March 30th, 2021, and that delivery schedule right now is under review. We did consider, prior to the most revised timeline, we did consider the delivery of apportionment data by April 30th, 2021, and then the redistricting data by July 31st of 2021. And those dates will be revised. Can we have slide 2 up, please? The next slide.
It's up. Go ahead.
Okay, the self-response rate summary. This is for nationwide data. My colleague Brian Berman will go into detail on Nevada's self-response rates and the response rate from your state. But nationwide, we've had a total self-response rate of 64.5%. This was as of August 25th. The total number of households responding as of August 25th was 94.3 million households. And then you'll see that the response rate mode is broken down by percentage through internet, paper, and phone. The next slide will talk about update leave, which I mentioned earlier.
It's ready.
Our original workload in our update leave operation was scheduled to cover approximately 6.8 million households. And when pandemic arrived post March 18th, we had covered approximately 736,000 housing units. Our update leave workload was completed on August 10th. The update leave operation, it was broken down by response rate as well, and you can see the total responses through update leave, internet, paper, and phone. Next slide, please.
Go ahead.
It's ready.
Okay, our group quarters operation, this is the special process where Census Bureau works hand in hand with group quarter administrators to gather population data for those facilities. And you'll see that the table, the group quarters table there below, shows our initial workload. We added additional facilities, which brought to a current workload of 212,000. Of those 212,000 facilities, we've completed and closed out approximately 174,000 cases. Our current workload is the remaining 37,000 facilities, which puts us at 82% completion as of that August 16th date. Next slide, please.
It's ready.
So in our service-based enumeration, these are locations that typically service the temporarily homeless population, our transitory locations that service also homeless populations. And these could be places like soup kitchens, evac centers, and so forth, as well as mobile food vans. Prior to COVID-19, we were scheduled to conduct this operation between March 30th and April 1st. In late May, early June, we consulted about 67 national and local organizations to help us with determining the best date to conduct our service-based enumeration. And based on the feedback that we received from those stakeholders, our employees, as well as our consultation with stakeholders and our operational leads, we selected September 22nd through the 24th to conduct this operation. And this will include the homeless count of non-sheltered individuals and families. The current status of this transitory outdoor location operation, we're making appointments with our community partners to conduct that operation. And that's going on right now through early September. And we've hired approximately 45,000 employees under the service-based enumeration to conduct this operation. Next slide, please.
It's ready.
Okay. I apologize. There's a lag time on my screen with the computer, so that's why the lag. But in this slide, with the title of Safety During Field Activities, on August 7th, the CDC joined us to issue a joint statement that our non-response follow operations, this is where census employees physically go to households and other locations to conduct the interviews, to receive data that folks did not submit on their own. And in that statement, the CDC felt that there was minimal risk by census employees to mitigate the risk of transmission of COVID-19. And of course, we're following all the CDC recommendations and guidelines, such as wearing face masks, maintaining social distance, 6 feet or more, practicing hand hygiene, and of course not entering homes when conducting interviews. Next slide, please. We are maintaining our contact strategy, which is that during our non-response follow-up operation, those households that have not responded will be visited a minimum of 6 times to remind those households to submit their census questionnaires. Next slide, please. With regard to the apportionment count, our objective is to come up with a plan to provide an apportionment count by the statutory deadline of December 31st, 2020. Our goal is to resolve at least 99% of housing units in every state, and this is in conjunction and comparable to previous decennials that we've conducted. We are going to maintain our strategy of visiting occupied housing units a minimum of 6 times for those housing units that have not responded. We're maximizing our staff and our production hours for field data collection operations to conclude our field data collection by September 30th, 2020. And then on the back end, we're streamlining our process to deliver the apportionment counts by the statutory deadline of December 31st, 2020. Next slide, please. So as illustrated in the table chart below, we are adapting to dynamic situations on the ground. We're working with our community partners on additional strategies, such as the first one you see there on the left. We're implementing outbound phone calling activities to supplement in-person contacts. And this provides an additional method to enumerate those hard-to-reach communities. We're also expanding the use of our non-response follow-up travel teams. This is where we will move our travel teams and non-response teams to those areas where they're needed. And we found that using more experienced staff and moving those teams to supplement the existing teams in hard-to-reach communities has been helpful in increasing participation rates. And lastly, we are extending our mobile questionnaire assistance operation. We're deploying our trained staff to assist with self-response in low response areas. And that's going on, that will go on through the deadline of September 30th. And of course, we are targeting those communities that are indicating a low self-response rate with those activities that I mentioned above. And that concludes my presentation. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Brian Berman, where you'll hear about your state response rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. And we'll hear from Mr. Berman now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to be with you once again. Thank you, members of the committee, for having me. As we all know, there are 3 ways, right, to respond to the census this year. It's easier than ever, right? Online at my2020census.gov, over the phone at 844-330-2020, and then, of course, we have the traditional paper questionnaire, which we're excited to announce that we've mailed out additional paper questionnaires just this week to households that have yet to respond, for folks that want to respond via paper. Today, I'm here with you in a limited capacity. I'm going to talk about 2 things. Nevada's really terrific progress with self-response, even during a pandemic. The numbers are great, as I'm going to show you here in a moment. And then how your partnership team, your census partnership team, is going to get the most out of the next 6 weeks so that we have the best self-response rate ever. Slide 2, Mr. Stewart, please. What we're looking at here is a picture of the self-response rates by county here in Nevada, color-coded. You can see on the bottom The bluer the shade, the better the self-response rate. You'll see that Nevada's self-response rate as of yesterday was 63.7%. So that provides some context. In 2010, Nevada's self-response rate was 61.4%. Again, 61.4%. And you're thinking to yourself, that's 3.5% higher than 61.4%. That's correct. Nevada's progress is outstanding in terms of self-response. Nevada's growth in self-response rate, responses since 2010 is second overall in the entire country out of the 50 states. So we have done a fabulous job, and it's due to a lot of the folks that are listening on the line. So just thank you for that. I want to go into depth to show you why we're doing so well. And if you could please open slide 3. Really, what I want to emphasize initially, I will get to my friends in the north here in a moment, but I want to talk about Clark County here for a second, because we have some really neat going on down here. Back in 2010, Clark County's self-response rate was 60.4%. As of yesterday, it was 64.2%. Clark County, with 2.2 million people, has grown more than 6% in self-responses, which is really, really great. It's hard to overemphasize how great that is. And as you can see here on the left, and the rankings by city, the growth in Clark County has been powered by our amazing cities. Each of our cities in Clark County have gone above and beyond anything that they've ever done in terms of self-response, and we have terrific results. Boulder City has grown 2.1% since 2010. Las Vegas has grown 3.8%. North Las Vegas has grown a cool 5.1%. That's pretty great. In Mesquite, and this is going to sound silly, this is right, 22.8% growth since 2010. Right? And it's really some really amazing statistics. And at the top of that list there, you see my hometown, Henderson, Nevada. I'm very proud to report that's 73.9%. It is exceptional across the entire country. I looked up the list of the top performing cities with more than 250,000 people as of yesterday. The list is as follows: Lincoln, Louisville, Seattle, Madison, Henderson, Nevada, a place to call home. Number 5 in the whole country in large cities and self-response. Right? If you have a city with more than 300,000 people and you've got a response rate of more than 73%, it's a big reason why we've seen such great growth here in Clark County. So really, really exciting stuff. On slide 4, please. On slide 4, we see the response rates for municipalities with 25,000 people and fewer. And again,
Mr. Berman?
we see a lot of...
Mr. Berman, let me interrupt you for a second. We're behind on the slides. So I think you're going on to slide 4 now, and we're stuck on slide 1. So Mr. Stewart, could you check that?
Let me see. I've got slide 4 up on mine. So let me, we can pause, Madam Chair, just momentarily. I'm going to see if I can get back on this. And one second.
Okay, thanks. Yes, mine says slide 1.
Oh, okay. It was coming up full screen on my side. I apologize. Let me try this one more time.
Michael, this is Jen with Broadcast. I'm here to assist you as well.
Thank you.
Michael, can you hit F5 so we can see the full screen presentation?
Okay. Did hit F5. Is that working?
It is not. We are still seeing the behind the scenes view. So you might want to click view up top there.
Reading view?
I'm sorry, go back to the home tab. And then click the enable editing button there up top.
That's probably it. How's that?
All right, we see self-response by county now.
Okay.
And now we are seeing 2020 census total self-response. Is that the slide we should be on?
Mr. Stewart, with slide 3, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Berman. Is that the 2020 census total response, or is it the map following that?
The 2020 census total self-response.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. We're back on. My apologies.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me know that, and if I get a little ahead of the PowerPoint presentation, please just stop me and I'm happy to wait. I wanted to take a step back, and I promised I wanted to show some of the great growth we've had in some of our northern counties. You can see on the bottom left column, there you see the rankings by counting with the self-response rate. I want to point out 3 particular counties are doing terrific. I hope you all like double-digit growth. Lyon County has grown 11.1%. Douglas County has grown 11.9% since 2010. And then, of course, everyone's favorite Story County with crazy growth, 29.9% growth is the 2010 self-response number. Terrific. Slide 4, please. So we can take a look at the municipalities with fewer than 25,000 people. We have some great self-response rates here as well. I also want to point out Fernley, currently got 12.9% self-response rate growth in 2010. So we've got double-digit growth both in our largest communities and some of our smallest communities as well. So the self-response rate effort here in Nevada is spread wide and far, and we're really, really pleased with the progress. I want to tell you now about how your partnership team that's been on the ground now for a little while now, more than a year, plans on maximizing the next 6 weeks to get the most self-response as possible. Thanks to the amazing partnerships that we have with 3 Square here in the south and Food Bank of Northern Nevada in the north, we are now attending to 15 food distribution events a week, where we are talking with folks as they are waiting in their cars, inviting them to self-respond and giving them information so they know how easy it is to self-respond. I can tell you that since we've instituted, and this is what Mr. Gonzalez was referring to earlier as mobile questionnaire assistance, MQA, that's our program here in Nevada. We're primarily trying to focus on the folks we think that have yet to self-respond, and we think that these food distribution events are a great opportunity. And I can tell you, as someone who's in here with the data, in the last 2 weeks, and we've been emphasizing these events, we have seen a great an uptick just in the last week. Nevada is growing faster than any other state in the country right now, so we're very pleased about that. In terms of these MQA events, I'm very pleased to report that as of this morning at Lowman Elementary School, this is our 100th global questionnaire event that we have completed here in Nevada since July 21st, when we were given the okay that it was safe to go into the field. So on the way forward, we're going to double down. We're going to have at least 20, I get my word on that, at least 20 events each week for the rest of the way. And we're going to try to get as many self-responses as we can. And before we pause and we open up for questions for Mr. Gonzalez and I just wanted to take a moment to thank a few of our partners. These amazing numbers that I'm showing you, it didn't have to be this way. We were 40th in the country in 2010 in self-response. If we were at the same point this time, we would be at 59%, right? We are 63.7. And the reason, this is in the midst of a pandemic, and what the governor is saying is the greatest economic crisis in the state's history. And I think the reason that is, and it's the amazing partners that we have. And I think first and foremost, we have to thank the State's Complete Count Committee chaired by the Lieutenant Governor. She has been leading a group of 90 volunteers for more than a year and coming up with the most creative ways possible to get self-responses here. I told this committee back in March, I thought we had the best Complete Count Committee in the whole nation, and I'm very pleased looking at the data. They made me look pretty good. For us to be in a complete shutdown, to still get this big growth in self-response is due to all that work that they did for the year prior here and all the amazing organizations that they brought together. And like, for example, these food distribution events, that's the reason we were able to get that was because of the connections we have through the Complete Count Committee. And I also want to thank some of the municipalities we've been working with. I mentioned some of the cities and all the great work they've done. And I also want to thank Clark County specifically, the commissioners and Manager King, for their leadership. They have gone above and beyond. They have done everything we have asked, and we have asked a whole lot of them training space to allow, we trained more than 1,500 of their employees as census ambassadors. They're actively helping us in September with the service-based enumeration and the count of folks experiencing homelessness. They have, to Clark County, we want to say thank you again for everything that you've done to help us. We would not be able to get the accurate count that we will get if it wasn't for them. And I'll finish on this note. I've had the privilege in the past year, I've met hundreds of public employees in the county. And these are some of the finest, most upstanding people I've ever met. And it's true, not just in the county, but in the cities as well, and the state employees as well. I cannot be more impressed. This collective character is destiny here in Southern and Northern Nevada. I think we're going to be just fine. Thank you for having me today, Madam Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berman. We will now open to questions from committee members. And as you have questions, please feel free to direct them to whichever of the two speakers you would like to address your question. So we'll open it for questions. And let's see. Can't see you all. So just hop in and let me know who you are and if you have a question.
Madam Chair, this is Jason Frierson. If I could ask a quick question?
Please go ahead.
I mean, this might be oversimplifying it, but when we talk about the response rate, how do we know what we don't know? Like, how do we know that we're not overlooking people who haven't been counted yet? Like, what is that percent based on from a starting point?
Thank you, Assemblyman, for the question. I have a slide that might provide some helpful guidance. If you could pull up slide 5. I'll take you behind the curtain on our strategy here. I was talking about mobile questionnaire assistance. What we're looking at is a live map of the self-response data here in Clark County. So the color in brown, that's going to be the Las Vegas Strip, and then you can see the highways for the folks that are in the valley. And to answer your question, Assemblyman, we have data based on where folks live and their response. And so we are doing events in the areas on the map that are in orange and in tan. Right. So these are the areas. So we have great data this year, best data we've ever had. So we're able to know which neighborhoods still need work on self-response. So like I can tell you that it's Paradise, here in Clark County, it's Paradise, it's Winchester, it's Sunrise Manor, we have some work in downtown Las Vegas, some East Las Vegas, eastern North Las Vegas as well. But because we have such good data, we're able to target our mobile questionnaire assistance events in the neighborhoods that need it the most. And I can tell you in the past year, we were able to do a lot more field work. These were the areas that you see in orange where we spent most of our time. And we're very pleased with the growth that we've gotten because of the time that we invested.
And is that like utility bills or like just postal service mailing addresses? Like, how do we know that there's not more or fewer people in any given area that we haven't caught up with yet?
Yeah, if I can just add, Assemblyman, this is Guillermo Gonzalez. 65% of the addresses we obtained from the master list that the U.S. Post Office has. The remaining 35% are the ones that we tried to capture through our update leave operation, which was to go out and verify addresses and locations. And that map that Mr. Berman put up is updated 24 hours, every 24 hours. So that's as close to real time as we can get with those areas that haven't responded.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Answer your question, Speaker?
It did, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Assemblywoman Hardike.
Thank you so much, Chair. This is for Mr. Berman as well. I was just looking at the slides on slide number 3, and I know you had mentioned that Nevada was at 63% response rate, so we didn't make the top 10, but have we been working with other complete count committees in other states, specifically Minnesota, who has an over 74% response rate, to figure out what complete count is doing to generate such, I guess, high response?
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. As much as I think Minnesota is a lot of folks like to see it as the gold standard in self-response. I would point out, though, not to say anything against anyone else, but they haven't met their 2010 rates yet. And then I can tell you that at least in we've done a lot of collaboration throughout the West. There's been a lot of trading of ideas between Nevada, California, Oregon, Washington. Coming up with you'll see Washington's they have the highest growth of any state in the country. But so yes, we've been collaborating, and then we are collecting best practices, and hopefully, if Nevada grows at the same rate that we grew from 2010 to 2020, we will be in the top 10 by 2030. So we just the pandemic slowed us down a little bit, but we're right on track.
And I have just one more follow-up, if that's okay, Madam Chair. Will we be able to track which, I guess, I sit on the Complete Count Committee, so I'm familiar with the subcommittee groups that we broke up into, and we know, which areas are harder to target, less response rate. Will we be able to track where the response rate came from? Like, if our hard to count communities were still the lowest responding, so that we can come up with a plan to focus on that for the next census?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Absolutely. We will have that data to a tract level. So a tract is about a neighborhood of 4,000 people, and that's even available right now on the live website, where you can take your mouse and scroll over each little neighborhood, and you can see what the response rate was in the tract in 2010, and then you can see what it is here in 2020 and see if we're doing better or worse.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from committee members for Mr. Gonzalez or Mr. Berman?
Madam Chair, can you hear me? Senator
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just concerned about the general breakdown. The three smallest rural counties, Esmeralda, Eureka, and Lincoln, are at the very bottom. Any real rationale why we're not getting response out of those rural communities? Because I am concerned that will, extrapolate on up even into some of the larger, when you get into Lander, Humboldt, if we're not reaching those outlying areas.
Thank you for the question. It is a serious concern. And one way I think this committee could really be a big help is to help, because of the pandemic. We weren't really able to do the field operations we wanted to do in our rural communities up until the middle of July. So what we could be doing in the next 6 weeks in terms is reaching out to folks in our rural communities, making sure that they know if they haven't received the census mailer yet, they can respond via phone, 844-330-2020, and online at 2020census.gov. And I completely agree. We need to get as many folks counted in the rural communities as possible.
Madam Chair, is any way, I don't know, would it be, maybe we need to put some pressure on those local county commissions, again, those three although Lincoln County does have a city, but maybe there's just a general breakdown. Maybe local government could help us from responding, getting those people to respond. Just concerning as I look at those numbers, when you're only getting 20%, I know it's not a lot of people, but it's a piece of the state, and at 20% reporting, it's not very good.
I would agree with you, Senator. So yeah, let's see if there's some things we can do to reach out to maybe there, and maybe we could even go through NACO to help us with some of those smaller rural counties to make sure we can get an increase in their response rate. So yeah, I'm sure we can help out on that. Other questions or comments from committee members?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Assemblyman
Please
Lawrence.
go ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Berman. What was Nevada's total final response rate in the 2010 census, so to understand kind of where we're at in relation to that?
Thanks for the question. Nevada's self-response rate in 2010 was 61.4%.
Great. And do you know what the final response rate was after the follow-up with non-responses?
I'm sorry, I don't have that offhand right now.
That's okay. And my other question, kind of related to this, is with the non-response follow-up. So, looking at the slides that that Guillermo provided, that period was originally going to span about 2.5 months. Now it's around a month and a half. I'm just wondering, you've discussed some of the community-based, the mobile outreach events that are going on. I'm just wondering if you think you'll still be able to reach the desired amount of outreach given that compressed schedule for follow-up with enumerators.
Thank you for the question. It's challenging for sure with the pandemic. I'm very happy to report that in the initial few weeks here of non-response follow-up, technology has improved our productivity significantly. Mr. Olson, our field director, said it was up to 2/3 more productive. The interviews were based relative to 2010, so that's a big help. And we really do appreciate your concern. And I do want to say, one of the biggest ways this committee could help the census operation here in the next 6 weeks is with informing your constituents to please respond when that census taker comes to the door. That the census takers are out there, that these are locals, that these are Nevadans hired to get a count of their own local community, that they're going to be wearing a mask, they're going to stay 6 feet away, that the census is only 9 questions long, and it will take less than 10 minutes. If you all could help reinforce that message, to please respond when the census taker comes, that will help us that could really be a big help in the next 6 weeks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just have one last question along that vein as we do that outreach as well. The administration has previously, attempted to ask questions about citizenship in the census, and has recently made statements around trying to exclude certain non-citizens from some of the final counts. In your experience, has that had an impact in outreach and responses that you've gotten from some of the members of the community as you're doing your follow-up activities?
That is a great and complicated question. Certainly there is an impact, but I would say that it's been mitigated by our terrific volunteers, right? If there's messaging, any sort of messaging out there that is discouraging people to respond, that we have such a wide and deep network of folks that are passionate and care about the census, that we're able to make a personal connection and let folks know that there is no citizenship question on the census, and that no census information will be shared with any other agency of any other government under penalty of very stiff fines and prison time.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Berman.
If I can just add, Assemblyman, this is Guillermo Gonzalez. This is where our partnership with those trusted messengers in the community has been very valuable, because they are the trusted voices in the community, and they've helped us assure the public and members of the community that their information is confidential. By statute, it can't be shared with any agency outside the Census Bureau, including law enforcement. So that's been a big help, but we continue to drive that message home as much as we can.
Thank you both for that. I appreciate it. I appreciate your passion for making sure that everyone gets counted. It's appreciated to have some of our folks on the ground with the Census Bureau working hard to make sure that message gets out. We will help do the same. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Watts, for your questions. Any other committee members with questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much, Mr. Gonzalez and Mr. Berman. We really appreciate your time this morning. And as you noticed from many of our committee members who had questions, we all are very supportive of your efforts, and just let us know what else we can do. And I will also be chatting with Senator Goycochea to see what else we can do to assist with those smaller rural communities and make sure that we can get that count up. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to brief you today.
Thank you. And we'll now go on. So, Mr. Whitehorn, when you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me pull this up. A second here. There we go. All right, are you able to see that?
We see you.
It may take a moment. There may be a lag for the
Sure. We'll wait for you.
presentation.
Your presentation is important.
Again.
Yeah, James, this is Tanner with Broadcast. If you want to just give it a second and then pull it up again. Okay, they should be able to see it now.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to start by thanking you very much, Madam Chair and fellow committee members, for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to you today. My plan is to actually sort of walk you through the 2020 Census Redistricting Data Program, because I think it will give you a good idea of the work that Michael and his team has been doing with the Census Bureau to help prepare the data for the 2020 Census Redistricting Data release coming next year. And then it will also probably address some of the questions you already have, but then maybe lay the foundation for some additional questions that you may want to ask. So the mission of the Census Redistricting Data Program is spelled out in Public Law 94-171. This was passed back in 1975 when the states sort of banded together because they realized that with the advent of one person, one vote, and with the passage of the Voting Rights Act, that they just didn't have the data that they needed and the granularity that they needed to do the work of legislative redistricting. So what that law did is it spelled out a few things that the Census Bureau is required to do. One is we have to establish a program that allows the states to identify the geographic areas for which they need census data for conducting their work. And this has been historically defined as by the states as census tabulation blocks. Those are the smallest piece of geography for which the Census Bureau provides data. And we call them sometimes, offhand, we call them the Legos. There's every other piece of geography that we produce is built from census blocks. Also, voting districts have been identified as being important building blocks for legislative redistricting. So we make offer an optional program for states to provide those. And then, of course, legislative and congressional districts, because it's important that we provide statistics on legislative districts and congressional districts so that folks can understand the community that they're representing. So the program requires me to work with the states to establish the criteria for how we're going to do that geographic exchange, identify what needs to go into those tabulations. But one of the most important parts of it is that we're required to conduct that program in a nonpartisan manner. And we do so by reaching out at the very beginning of the program. So this was back in 2015. We sent a letter to the governor. We sent a letter to the legislative leadership at the time, both parties, both chambers, and asked them to find someone that could represent the state in a nonpartisan manner. And so that's how we ended up with Michael as our official liaison to the program. And we've worked with him throughout the decade and will continue to work with him well after the delivery of the data. And you'll see why as I go through the presentation. And then the final duty of my office is to make sure that we get that data to the officials with the responsibility for legislative apportionment or districting in each state, which we identify as both the legislative leadership of both parties and both chambers, but also any redistricting commissions that may exist if they have members already established, And of course, the governor is also a required recipient. And we have to do that by no later than 1 year from census day, which would be April 1st of 2021, according to the current statute. And so what we did for the 2020 census is very similar to what we did in 2010. We set up a multi-phase program. We had the block boundary suggestion project and the voting district project. That's the geographic portion of the program. We have the data delivery. That's the part where we've got coming up. And then, of course, getting those legislative and congressional districts into the census universe so we can provide you with valuable statistics and information about those districts. And then finally, the evaluation of the program. I'll go through each of these in just a little more detail. So the block boundary suggestion project is the first part of the redistricting data program that occurs during the decade. We had what we called an initial delineation. That was the first exchange of information with the states. That went from December to May in 2015 to 2016. And what this does is it allows the representative in the state to provide information to the Census Bureau about what they want as block boundaries in the data that they'll receive after the 2020 census. The Census Bureau creates those Legos, those blocks, with a very specific idea in mind, and then we create them in order to help us with enumeration. But political geography sometimes has a different need. So the example I like to use is that for the Census Bureau, a street center line is a great block boundary. But if you're trying to keep a community of interest together, you want to keep both sides of the street in the same block. So having some sort of delineation of blocks that allows you to group those two areas together is more important when you're looking at this from a redistricting standpoint. So we do that by conducting a program where they can, the liaison can suggest must holds, make this a census block or don't make that a census block. But we've expanded the program to allow for other geographic adjustments that might be important. We allowed them, the liaisons, to provide updates to area landmarks. These were state parks. They could also delineate prison areas, anything that was of interest to the state that might be helpful. We also did something we've never been able to do before, but technology allowed us to do now, which is we created a version of what would be the 2020 blocks early so that they had something, the liaison had something to react to. And so we did that every time we send out the new data we provided. This is what the blocks would look like if the blocks were made today. So they had that as sort of part of the base to evaluate. And then something that's been asked for since the beginning of the program, but because it's handled under a legal authority with another program, the Boundary Annexation Survey, is updates to legal boundaries. This is your incorporated places, your county boundaries, your state boundaries. We were able to work and coordinate with the Boundary and Annexation Survey this decade to allow the redistricting liaison to provide suggested updates to those legal boundaries that then the Boundary and Annexation Survey would investigate with the legal authority over whichever type of boundary we were trying to get modified. In phase 2, this was the voting district project. Voting districts are the precincts or wards. This is sort of our umbrella term for this. Knowing that these are variable, we did actually an initial delineation, and then we did 2 rounds of verification, one of which just ended this year. We finished processing those this summer into the geographic database that the Census Bureau is going to use to produce data. We did have participation from Nevada for both the block boundary program and the voting district program. We had very good, strong participation for that. And some of the things that people can do here are the same as what they could do in the block boundary suggestion project. They can also not only provide those precincts and wards boundaries so we can make sure that we give you data for those areas, but they could add new features that were needed or correct misaligned features. They could update those area landmarks, as I mentioned, and also continue to suggest updates to legal boundaries. And now here's where we get to the part that people are probably most interested in, because this is the part that's coming up. This is the actual delivery of the data. So in order to help states prepare for redistricting, it's become a common practice of the program to create what we call a prototype data set. So the Census Bureau has in the past done dress rehearsals where we test all of our systems and operations. This decade we did something called an end-to-end census test, which is very similar in its goals. And we created from that test prototype geographic support products and prototype tabulations. We posted these to the web, and we also delivered these to the legislative leadership in February and March of 2019. And these are a demonstration data set, so you can see what you can expect to get when the 2020 census starts delivering its data. Now, this data is only for Providence, Rhode Island, because that's where the 2018 end-to-end test was conducted. But it does have the structure and the fields and the types of information that you can expect it to receive. So for the official delivery, it was mentioned in Guillermo's talk that we had an original plan and that we're actually working on a new plan at the moment for the official delivery of both the geographic products and then the redistricting tabulations themselves. So our original plan, we were going to try to have the geography out between November 20th and February 1st. And then the redistricting data would be February 18th to March 31st of 2021. With the changes that we're running into due to COVID, and then also trying to get our apportionment delivery back onto our statutory requirement, we are still working to sort out how we're going to put this schedule together to be able to meet the statutory deadline for getting that redistricting data to the states no later than April 1st of 2021. We think we can do it. We just haven't linked all the parts yet together yet to show that we can do it. And so that's why I just have the little asterisks and we're still a little phrasing things a little bit as to be determined. But our goal and our charge has been to develop a schedule that will get us there. And we're in the middle of working through that. We wanted to get the apportionment schedule to be solid before we can move on to the redistricting schedule, which we have now begun to do. It does look like the geographic support products should be out in either late February or early March, but we'll have a more official date once we finish that scheduling work, and we'll be sharing that with all the liaisons and other organizations and stakeholders who are interested. So what will be in those products? The primary one that folks who redistrict at the state level will be interested in are the shape files. That's the geographic boundary files for geographic information systems. This is the primary mapping files that the Census Bureau produces. We do also produce maps. These are PDF maps. These are large scale maps that can be printed on plotters. We have multiple kinds. We have a county block map, which shows counties with every block within the county. We have a state legislative with voting district map, which shows sort of the relationship between voting districts and the state legislative district. We have a tract map. You heard that being mentioned as an important piece of geography when they were talking about the response rates. It's sort of a longitudinal data set that the Census Bureau creates around tract level data, and then school district maps. So we'll have all of those available. There'll be PDFs available online. We'll have something called block assignment files. These are just tabular listings of what blocks make up what geography. So if I wanted to go in and say, what block makes up my city, you have a listing of all those blocks available to you. This can be helpful if you're working with the data and you're trying to work with it outside of a geographic information system. You're just interested in looking at things from a tabular standpoint. And then we're going to have something called block-to-block relationship files. This is a crosswalk between the 2010 blocks and the 2020 blocks. Each decade, we essentially throw out the previous decade's blocks and we regenerate new ones because of the enormous amount of change, both positionally and accuracy from our database, but also growth in localities across the country. So we create new blocks, but we do create this file so that if you need to crosswalk data for one reason or another, you can link the 2010 to the 2020 blocks with those relationships. For the data product itself, if you have worked with the decennial census data from last decade or even from the 2000 census, this should look fairly familiar. We have the race table, the race for the population 18 and over, the Hispanic or Latino, not Hispanic or Latino by race, and then the same for the voting age population or 18 and over. We do have a housing table. This is occupancy status, which means vacant or occupied. So it's a count of housing units and then with their designation of whether they were considered occupied or vacant at the time of enumeration. And so all of those tables are what we put in the 2010 product that you may have used last decade. We do have a new table this decade. It's a group quarters population by group quarters type. This is just for total population, but identifies the number of people in the group quarters by the group quarter type for correctional institutions for adults, nursing homes, military housing, college or student university housing, these what we call major group quarters types. This is as I mentioned, only for total population. There's no demographic breakdown, but all of these tables, including the group quarters table, will be available at the individual census block level. So it'll be available at the finest geographic level possible. The group quarters table was added this decade because there are several states like Nevada, but there are many others that actually move populations from group quarters to a previous address or an alternate address before they create the data from which they're going to conduct their redistricting. I believe it's 9 states now do this for prisoners. Hawaii still does it for military and students. And then Kansas used to do it for military and students until they did a constitutional amendment in 2018 that removed that requirement. So they no longer have to do that. So what's in these tables? When you look at the race table, you'll look the table for the race or the race 18 and over are exactly the same sort of structure. The only thing that changes is if you look at the top of the table here where it says universe, one universe would be for the total population. The other table universe would be for the total population 18 years and over. So that just shows you that the people reflected in this table are based on this universe. And then it goes through and it has whatever respondents have indicated as their race. So if they indicated just one race, they ended up in the population of one race, and then they have the race category in which they picked. If they chose 2 races, they end up in the population of 2 races, and then they have whichever combination of those races they picked. And we iterate this all the way through until we get to someone who has decided to choose all 6 possible race categories. And that gives you 63 total possible entries in the table. So then we have something very similar for the Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino by race tables, and the one for the voting age population. Again, this is the total population and the total population 18 and over. The difference here is if someone declared their ethnicity as being Hispanic or Latino, they get counted in the very top record there where it says Hispanic or Latino. And then all those people who chose not Hispanic or Latino are iterated by race all the way through those 6 or more races. And then for the final 2 tables, as I mentioned, they're much simpler. You have the occupancy status. This is just a total count of housing units, and then a breakdown of which ones are occupied, which were vacant. And then the group quarters population, which is just the total population that lives in group quarters. And then it's broken into these different types of group quarters for folks to work with. Now, how's this data going to be delivered? We have a very sort of official delivery process to ensure that we're meeting our legal requirement to deliver the data to the official recipients. And as I mentioned, the official recipients are defined in the law as the governor, and then those with the initial responsibility for legislative redistricting and apportionment, which we've interpreted over time to mean the legislative leadership in each chamber and any redistricting commissions that have been established and have commissioners named. We'll be doing 2 methods of delivery for the official recipients. The first is we'll be overnighting physical media. This is going to be a case that has a DVD and a flash drive in it. They'll both have the exact same data on them. The only reason we're including both is because I know that at the Census Bureau, as we've upgraded our equipment, our DVD drives have begun to disappear. So a lot of people don't have access to DVD drives. So we're including both types, but it will contain the same information. It will also have software on there that runs, that does not need to be installed. So even if you have a security restrictions on your work laptop, you'll still be able to run this. It runs just in random memory, and you can use this software to review and then extract some of the data from the disk to make it easier to use. So we'll mail that overnight. We'll also be signing for the official recipients up in advance for what we call embargoed access to our data.census.gov. If you're a census data user, you would know that we used to have a tool called American Fact Finder. That's been replaced by the data.census.gov platform. And so we will allow people to sign up for this embargoed access. And the morning that these physical media are supposed to be showing up in the mailboxes of the official recipients, we'll turn on the switch and allow them to also access this embargoed version of data.census.gov. This will require them to pre-register. So we're going to work with them in the lead up to that release to make sure that they have that access if they should choose to want it. Then we're going to also confirm that it's been received. We can see when people have logged into that web tool. So we'll make a phone call, make sure that they've been able to access the data. When the mail hits the mail room and we see that the tracking number tells us it's been delivered, we'll be doing a phone call to make sure that that package has been received, just so we can make sure that we're meeting that obligation. Then 24 hours later, we'll flip the switch again, and this data will all be released to the public. It'll go out on the data.census.gov platform. This gives the full Data Explorer functionality. That's the tool on data.census.gov. We've asked that there be expansion of the capacity from what we used to have, where large data downloads can be conducted. We have set that definition as being all blocks within state for all the tables in the PL file. So all of the information, all those tables I talked about for all the blocks and even the largest state can be downloaded all at once using this tool. We will also have a text version of the files that we call for expert users. They're the summary file structure. These require people to sort of do some processing and put them into a database and do some linking. So that's why we say it's for expert users, but it provides the full breadth of the product. It has every piece of geography, it's all in there. So that's also going to be available. And those, the only thing that I mentioned here is that they're pipe delimited this decade to try to make them a little easier to use. There used to be a combination of fixed width and comma delimited. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I just wanted to mention that, you know, we will be reaching back out through the liaison to collect the 118th congressional districts and the 2022 state legislative districts, because we're going to want to get those into our database. We will create new products from those so that people can understand the profiles of the districts that they represent. And we'll continue through the American Community Survey to provide updated statistics each year for those geographies. And then finally, we'll do a review and evaluation to see how the program was conducted, where we thought we had successes, but really to get the state's point of view and also to identify things that have changed in the legal landscape or in the way that redistricting is conducted, to make sure we capture all that as we go ahead and start formulating the plan for the 2030 census. The work never stops, it just changes which phase we're in. So I wanted to talk about a couple other products that are associated with the redistricting data and the voting rights office that I manage. One is the citizen voting age population by race and ethnicity. This is an annual tabulation that we've created from the American Community Survey 5-year estimates. We started this in 2011 at the request of the Department of Justice, and then they requested it in 2012, and then they requested it in 2013. So we just asked them, say, if you want this every year, just let us know, and they did. So my office took it on as an annual publication. And so we put out this special tabulation each year. We've done this for the last decade, and we usually release it in the first week of February. The idea is that this provides the data that's necessary for doing Section 2 analysis under the Voting Rights Act. And so this is sort of the way the content of that file looks. For the 2020 census, we are using administrative records to create this file. We're going to use the 2020 census frame. So that we'll have the advantage of using the full enumeration of the United States, and we'll be able to create this file and release it along the same timeline as the redistricting data. So when we get those schedules ironed out as to when we're going to get the redistricting data out, this should fall in line with those schedules. The main difference between the one that's from the American Community Survey and the one that we're doing from administrative records, there's two, and they're highlighted here in bold with the asterisks. One is we are using the version of our race coding that includes some other race alone. The American Community Survey does not use that category, but the decennial census does. So we are including that in the data that we release so that it's more compatible and folks can work with that to make it a little easier. And then because we're doing this from the full enumeration, we can actually create this at the block level. We don't have to keep it at the block group level like we do with the American Community Survey. And then finally, I wanted to mention to you something that we're doing, because I know that Nevada's a state that's interested in the prisoner reallocation for prior to conducting redistricting. And the Census Bureau did analysis and study of our residence rule criterion situations leading up to the 2020 census. But after all that work, the census determined that the concept of usual residence as established in the Census Act of 1790 really indicates that we should be counting prisoners at the correctional facility. But we do recognize that There are many states now, I believe 9, that have created a statutory requirement to count the prisoners at a pre-incarceration address. And so we are trying to offer a tool or tools to assist states. One of them you already saw, that was adding the group quarters table to the redistricting data. So you'd have that data available to you when you start doing your work. But the other is what we call the group quarters assistance tool. And this is a geocoding service. If you're not familiar with what a geocoder does, it takes an address and it identifies the location of that address. So the Census Bureau is going to set up a landing page about redistricting and our geocoding service with how to use it. My office will work with you to help you or help whoever you have working on this project work with it if they choose to work with it. It uses a public geocoding service that we have out now. So if folks want to practice with it, they can go to our geography division website of sub-website of the census.gov and work with that. And the external version does have a 10,000 address limit for people using it from the public side. That's a performance issue. If you go beyond that, it can get quite frustrating for both the users and you can get insufficient response. So one of the things we're doing to help the states is if they have a list that is greater than 10,000 addresses, they can submit that through a secure web incoming module that we have at Census, so it comes to us securely. We will run it against the same external geocoder that you would have run it if you were on the outside, but we'll run it on the server side, so you don't have those limitations. You're not doing something over an IP call and return. Then when that list is done running, we'll send this back through our secure email transfer service. And this is address agnostic. So if you find the need to move military or students or prisoners, it can be used for any of those. We are going to have some requirements around it that we have to do to keep this out of what we call our Title 13 arena. So the submitted addresses have to be pre-formatted by the person submitting them to the Census Bureau. We will have very specific instructions on how that'll be done. And then when we return the file, it'll add XY coordinates and the associated geography. So it'll tell you what county, tract, block those addresses are in. We can't modify the file that you send us, and we can't modify what goes back out. So if something doesn't geocode, you'll get the non-geocoded address back. That is something that we have to do so that this doesn't become Title 13, which would prevent us from sharing that altogether. So what this won't do, and I always hate kind of doing this because it's a little bit of a negative, but I want to just make sure we're very clear. The solution doesn't provide new tabulations. It just tells you what geography each address in the list that you've provided is in. It doesn't change the official counts that the Census Bureau provides. It does not link to our person records, so we don't match those addresses to individual people in our records. We just match the address to the geographic location if possible. And we can't use it against an internal geocoding system. We have to use the one that's available to the public. So when we submit it on the server side, we'll be submitting it to that same version. But it does help you because it will allow you to verify or identify the location of the GQs. You can geocode the GQs, make sure that we have them in the right blocks or find them if we didn't. We can use the GQ address list and then your defined unique identifiers so that you can create your own tabulation adjustment tables. And then you can also, by having that unique identifier, if you have information like race, ethnicity, or age data that is important for your adjustments, you'll be able to use this. Most of the states I've talked to are not planning to use this as their primary source. They're planning to use this as a backup source, but we're happy to support you either way with your choices there. And with that, I would just say thank you, and I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitehorn. And we'll go to our first question on Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Thank you so much, Chair. Just a quick question, because you were covering how we were counting incarcerated persons. So I just wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. Could you cover that again, how incarcerated persons are going to be counted for the apportionment?
Yeah. The Census Bureau uses the concept of usual residence, which and in our review of our residence criteria and situations determined that prisoners should be counted at the prison in which they're located.
So my question is, that's in complete contrast to Assembly Bill 450 that we passed in the 2019 legislative session. How is that going to work? Because Assembly Bill 450 requires them to be counted at their last known place of residence.
Right. So that's a state statute. And so that'll be the responsibility of the state to institute whatever data adjustments that they need. That was the description of the geocoding service is one tool that they could use to help them with that work. But what the state will have to take their prison records and make the choices about how do we reassign these people and identify which geography to which they should be assigned, and then create a new base layer of data because that's looked at as a state statute requirement as opposed to the ones that the Census Bureau has to operate under.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there other questions from committee members?
Madam Chair, if this, Jason Fries, if I could reiterate.
Speaker, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that the record is clear so that when we move forward, what you're saying is you're providing a starting point that we would then be charged with adjusting based on our own, so that we are not tied to that starting point, but it's just that a starting point that we would then modify based on our state statutory structure.
That's a very good way of putting it. This is not something that's completely new. In 2010, New York and Maryland both went through this exercise. Delaware was supposed to, and then they passed subsequent legislation to delay that until the 2020 census. But Maryland actually did that work, and they created a new base layer of data from which localities and the state were supposed to use to do their redistricting. And they did actually have to go to court, and they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that the work that they had done was appropriate.
Committee members, any further questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a
Please go ahead.
question. Thank you.
Mr. Watt.
I just had a question. Again, I mentioned this during the previous presentation. So the White House issued a memorandum in July on excluding undocumented immigrants from the apportionment base. And I didn't see any reference to that in your presentation. So I just wanted to ask and clarify that currently there are no plans for the Census Bureau to do that in its data delivery. Is that correct?
The redistricting data contains the full resident population. So the only numbers that are not included in the redistricting data are the federally affiliated count overseas, because those are only counted at the state level for the purposes of apportionment. But the remainder of the population in the United States is included in the redistricting data set.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? I do have one on, do you know when the group porters inmate geocoding service would be available to the states?
We don't have that date nailed down exactly, but I can sort of ballpark it for you. I believe that we will have it up and available by the end of March. It may be a little earlier than that, but we should definitely have it by the end of March.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Don't see or hear anyone jumping in, so thank you, Mr. Whitehorn. We really appreciate your presentation, and I'm sure we'll be in touch as we move through this process over the next months and year.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to speak with you.
And with that, we will move on to our next agenda item, which is number 6. And this is considerations for legislators and discussion of reapportionment and redistricting effects on local election administration. And we have 2 speakers, Joe Gloria, who is the Clark County Registrar of Voters, and Deanna Spicula from the Washoe County Registrar of Voters. And I believe Ms. Spicula is starting first, followed by Mr. Gloria. And when you're ready, please begin.
All right, I think you can hear me. I think my video is also started. So, thank you, Chairwoman Woodhouse, and thank you for the committee for allowing us to speak and kind of give a county or local election official perspective on the redistricting process and how it impacts how we administer elections. I do have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share if you give me a moment to get that up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We will wait till you get it up and then go ahead when you're ready.
All right. So my intention today, from what I want to present and kind of go over with those involved with the redistricting process and drawing those district lines, is kind of a perspective from, again, our the local election official perspective. And I provide, some visuals to kind of hopefully people understand from the visuals what we are looking at and what we have to do when we receive all that information back, when all the lines are redrawn. Let's see if we can go to the next. Okay. So just a quick overview just of Washoe County. We are not the largest as far as area wise goes, but we are the second largest as far as population goes in the state of Nevada. This is some basic information. We have slightly more registered voters than what appears on this infographic at the moment. And I expect, as we're going into we have a large amount of growth going on in Washoe County, a lot of new development that is occurring. So we're looking at, going over the 300,000 registered voters mark. I would say if not by the end of this year, by the end of, just going into to 2021, the number of districts that we have to be wary of when we're setting up election districts. We have 71 in Washoe County. So for my office and what Washoe County does, we administer elections for all of Washoe County in both cities, the city of Reno and the city of Sparks. The main district lines that we are managing during a redistricting process is the 50 that I have outlined. We do have other districts that do impact our county. However, most of, those are all ones that are either multi-county or statewide, and Washoe County is wholly contained within those districts. So when those lines change, usually they do not impact us. However, with growth and everything, it's up to, they could potentially impact Washoe County in the future here. So I just did a quick infographic, a quick screenshot of what I look at when I'm doing district and precinct work in our county. I started in 2011, and that was the first position I had, was doing redistricting in 2011. I've been doing this precinct and district work since. Throughout the office, even though I'm now the registrar, I still have kept this as my as part of one of my duties. I will be, of course, training somebody to do this for 2021, but I will be assisting in being hands-on with this process. So as you can see, these are, this is just kind of a visual of the district lines that we have to make sure that we're wary of as we're doing our precinct and redistricting work. This is what that same district looks like and how our precincts are formed. Through those, all those lines that you saw, we have to nest our precincts within the boundaries of those district lines. Again, another overlay of our precincts within those district lines. It's a little bit closer shot here, so you can kind of see how for every colored line that you see on the map on the left side, we have to create a precinct to fit within that that boundary. Some of the things that make it hard for us to do those precincting lines and district lines when we're working with them is as you can see here, this is an assembly district line that runs basically straight through houses and through neighborhoods. That is hard for us to work with, and it's. I mean, we can do the work. The houses that are split, we have to find out exactly what percentage of the house is actually in a certain district, but then we have to split those street ranges accordingly. So your neighbor gets a different ballot style than the person next to them, and then they talk, and it causes some confusion as to why somebody has a office on their ballot that their neighbor does not. We also have the top one's kind of the housing. The other one is, of course, the district line that runs straight through a mobile home park out in Verdi. Again, that's really hard to determine which ones end up in the city and which one, this is a city boundary, by the way, which ones ended up in the city and which ones do not. Again, they're neighbors on the other side, and a lot of these people do talk and they know each other, don't understand why somebody gets to vote on a City of Reno ward where the others don't. These are concerns that we have when we're looking at how we're splitting up and dealing with those streets as they go through district lines. So challenges that are that we have at a local level, limited resources and technology is of course always up there at the top of some of our constraints that we have. We do not have an integrated system with our GIS department. So when we get those boundary lines and we're drawing them, I'm moving my precinct lines and my district lines to match the redistricting lines that are given to us when we receive them. And it's a manual process for us, either consolidating or creating precincts, moving and splitting street ranges so people are in the correct precincts in the correct districts, and then moving those voters over into those new districts. That's a manual process on our end. It's very time consuming, and it's we're basically relying on human eyes and us telling our system what we believe are the right street ranges and the right addresses to go into a certain district by precinct. And we do it meticulously, but it is time consuming, and it's there are potentials for human error when it comes to moving those voters into those new districts. For us, precinct boundaries, they have to follow visible ground features or extensions of those visible ground features. So we don't use census blocks for when we're creating precincts. We have to use those visible ground features. So we have to figure out how to do that within the constraints of the district boundaries. The precincts must be composed of contiguous territory. And for Washoe County, we don't have any precinct splits. So they must be wholly contained within district lines. And one of the other things that we have to be wary of is that our maximum amount of voters per precinct is 3,000. So even though there's some areas where we could have larger precincts, we're capped at that 3,000. So we may have to split it up into 2 and 3 precincts when really all we really need is 1. The concern about polling locations and people being assigned polling locations based on their precinct and and those boundaries. That is, we use vote centers much like Clark County. So we don't have that constraint anymore. So we could actually expand our precinct boundaries over the 3,000 cap, and it wouldn't impact how many people are assigned to a polling location anymore. We don't assign precincts to polling locations anymore. We use the vote center model. So that restriction would be helpful. Of course, that's a legislative change that we'd have to seek, but that would be something that would be helpful for us when we're doing redistricting. That, if we weren't capped by that 3,000, we could actually allow a precinct to grow naturally especially with, it just allow that to grow and not have to worry about whether or not we're exceeding a cap or assigning too many voters to one polling location. Again, that restriction at this point in time is not really necessary. Some of the things, as you saw from some, I might go back just to see some of these maps. We get a lot of questions about why a precinct is so small. Why do we have precincts that do not have any voters? Why are some precincts shaped the way they are? And the answer is always just it's by the district lines that were confined. So like if you, just in this example, if you look at 7550 on the screen on the right map, that is a small just island, we call them island precincts because it's just one, sometimes one address, maybe two. We had to create that though, for some reason that the district lines, in this case, it's a city. The city boundary does not extend to that one or two parcels that are there. In other areas, we have designated, we have to precinct every single inch of land in our county. So there are a lot of areas, especially to the north of Washoe County in the north area, we just don't, there's no voters there. It's just land, but we still have to follow fire district lines. We have to follow, any of those other township boundaries, those types of boundaries. We have to create unique precincts sometimes for nobody. Nobody's living in there and don't see any growth going in there, but we still have to create those different precincts. So that's where we've come to why we have 557 now precincts, as opposed to only having maybe 300 or 400. So with that, I mean, I am supportive of nesting districts, especially assembly districts in the Senate districts. That helps eliminate more district lines. There's sometimes it's a difference between one street, whether or not I have to create a separate precinct based on an assembly and a Senate district line. It could be, a couple parcels, the way those are drawn. So that would be helpful, I think, at a local level, if nesting of the assembly districts into the Senate district lines, or if there was some kind of cooperation when drawing those lines, would be helpful for us maintaining our precinct and boundary lines and the voters within them. I think I will, unless anybody has any questions specific to me, go ahead and turn this over to Mr. Gloria for his input.
Madam Chair,
Thank you, Deanna.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Mr. Gloria for his presentation, and then committee members will have questions for the two of you. So thank you, Mr. Gloria, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and share some information with you. Deanna's done an excellent job of outlining a lot of the concerns that I share, so I'll keep my comments short and give you some information generally related to Clark County. Obviously, we're the largest county in the state of Nevada. We currently have a little over 2.2 million residents within Clark County, and similar to Washoe, and as was mentioned by the Census Bureau representatives, we've experienced a tremendous amount of growth, and we expect to continue to see that. Currently in Clark County, we have 1,150 precincts. There are 248 districts that we manage within the boundaries of Clark County. And currently, as of today, the number of registered voters is 1.183 million, and we're expecting that to increase to somewhere in the area of 1.250 by the time we reach the election in November. In Clark County, obviously, we support and administer the elections for the entire county to include the cities of Mesquite, North Las Vegas, Henderson, and Boulder City. And we have well over 150 district lines that we have to manage during the redistricting process. Going to the concerns that Deanna outlined, we share the same concerns with the district lines in the streets.
It's very important that we also cannot follow the census blocks. They're not used. So we have to use visible ground features or extensions of visible ground features as well in order to define our precincts. And much the same as Deanna in Washoe, we have a lot of small precincts that we're forced to create as a result of annexations ongoing with the city of Henderson, Boulder City, Las Vegas being the primary one that annexes on a regular basis based on property changes. We also have several of the zero precincts that Deanna described because we have to fully define the entire boundary of Clark County and identify every square foot within a precinct. I agree with Deanna as far as the maximum number of voters per precinct. It is currently capped at 3,000. However, in Clark County as well, we utilize the vote centers, and so increasing that number could possibly help us. I don't know how that would affect the rural counties. However, it would definitely help us in decreasing the number of precincts that are required to define as a result of redistricting. We have a lot of high density population growth, and so we have precincts where apartment complexes are developed, and as a result, in order to meet the NRS requirement of 3,000, we often have to split precincts in order to make sure that we don't go over that count. Just a few things that I want to mention as well. It's very important that we have coordination from the state level to our local GIS. We'll be working and working in collaboration with our central IT. They'll be providing some staff and some guidance to us to help us in the election department once we get into the redistricting process. And the timeline is very comforting to hear that the census district looks like they will be delivering data to you on time according to what their timelines described in their presentation. But we're anticipating that it's going to take a minimum of 8 weeks in Clark County to go through the redistricting process. We're hoping that we can begin that work sometime in October, completing in November, so that in the month of December, we'll be fully concentrated on making all of the changes in our election management system in time for judicial candidate filing, which starts on January 3rd. It is absolutely critical that if we're going to make use of the redistricting boundaries for 2022, that we have the information entered into the system so that we can begin our election process, which begins with candidate filing. Also, something to keep in mind, the mailers that need to go out, which has quite a bit to do with our roll maintenance and cleaning up the rolls. The timelines here are also critical so that we can get those mailers out to the voters in January, which gives us enough time before we hit the 90-day period when we can't make changes in the voter registration database based on people who are no longer in Clark County or have moved and not notified us. So all of that timeline information is very important to our process in preparing for the 2022 election. And with that, as again, I compliment Deanna. She gave a ton of good information. We share the same concerns that they have in Washoe County, and we're looking forward to working with the state and getting information and perhaps even some training at some point to make sure that we're meeting the requirements of the state for all of the redistricting efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Gloria. We appreciate that. So we'll go to committee members. You have questions for either of our speakers, our presenters on this item?
Madam Chair, if I may, this is Jason Frierson.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to ask actually of both of our presenters with respect to that 3,000 cap. To just, we don't have to go through it in detail today, but I would encourage you to follow up with me or with us about looking at any changes that might need to be made with respect to that cap to make it a more practical exercise for you all as far as precincts go. And I don't know if, you know, we obviously need to make sure that we include the rurals. We don't want any unintended consequences, but to the extent that we can make that adjustment, we remain ready to do that. Mr. Gloria, my other question was with respect to the prison inmate population and if you were listening to that part of the presentation earlier, is that an adjustment that you think would take a significant amount of time or energy to count folks from the counties, their home counties, as opposed to where they're incarcerated?
We're definitely going to have some coordination with our GIS so that we can make those data changes in the system. I don't know at this point, I don't have information related to how challenging that will be, but I'm sure it's something that we can accomplish. We just need to make sure that we can understand and get good information as to who is actually incarcerated, and we need to take into account to recognize the address that they last lived at to properly make the counts in these precincts.
Okay, thank you. And again, if you want to follow up with me on the 3,000 cap and what legislatively might need to happen to make that easier for you all, I'd welcome the chance.
Deanna makes a good suggestion there, Mr. Speaker. So we will definitely talk about it. I know we'll get together as clerks eventually when this election is over, and that'll be something we talk about.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions from committee members?
Madam Chair, Senator Goycochea.
Yes, Senator Goycochea, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to, I didn't pull up the statute, but just wondering, now that is just that's a statutory cap of 3,000 that we would be enlarging. So I'm struggling to see what impact that would have in, say, some of the smaller rural counties. Or am I missing it? Is it not just a 3,000 statutory cap?
No, sir. I believe that you're accurate in just it's just a cap of 3,000 voters. That doesn't mean that they had to approach that 3,000. They could definitely make the cap smaller in those rural counties. So I guess I'd have to think about it a little further. I'm not completely aware of how that would affect the rurals. I only mentioned it because sometimes when we get into discussions related to any changes, it's important just to keep in mind what the effects would be on the rural counties. But off the top of my head, I don't see really that it would be an impact to them. It would really just be an advantage to the larger counties so that we could eliminate the need to create additional precincts where it's not necessary due to the density of the growth that we have in Washoe and Clark County. So they wouldn't have to necessarily or be required to put their precincts at that larger maximum number. So I don't know that it would have an impact, but I would definitely put that to them to answer that question. They may think of something that I'm not thinking of, unless you can think of something, Deanna.
I can't. I agree with you. I don't know the number of precincts that those smaller rural counties administer. I think just from the distribution of the number of districts that they're dealing with is typically, smaller. So I don't know how it would affect them. I don't see a downside of allowing the cap to grow. Again, as Joe just mentioned, it doesn't mean that they have to consolidate or that they would be required to make use of larger precincts. I like to call them, maybe elephant precincts. I mean, kind of larger as opposed to like our, jackrabbit precincts, which is what we call our little island precincts. So again, I'm not sure if it would impact them, but then just being allowed to let our precincts naturally grow as population grows would be helpful for Clark County and my county. And I don't think it would have negative impact for the rural counties, but I would like to hear their opinion on that before making a statement for them.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Just from the outside looking in, I agree. Most of the rural counties would be more shaped by depending on their GIDs and their particular what was required as far as, again, whether it be commissioner district, school board trustees. That typically shapes it more in the rural counties than true population. And I don't see a downside in, say, that 3 going to 5 or whatever. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions from committee members? I don't see. So at this point, what we're going to do, first of all, I want to say thank you both to Mr. Gloria and to Ms. Specula for your presentations this morning, and we'll be in touch with you on some of the things that you might need to have, as well as getting in touch with some of the rural individuals who have concerns, especially about the 3,000 cap. I think what we're going to do now, we're not going to take a lunch break. So I'm going to take a 10-minute break now, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the agenda. So according to my phone, it's 11:28. So we will be back at 11:38. So let's just make it 11:40. So we are on break. I'd like to welcome everyone back. It is now 11:40, and we will continue on with our agenda. So let me see. I think we have most everyone back now. Excellent. Okay, our next agenda item is number 7. And this is an overview of reapportionment and redistricting activities and related programs monitored by the National Conference of State Legislatures. And we welcome Wendy Underhill, who is the Director of Elections and Redistricting, and Ben Williams, who is the Policy Specialist of Elections and Redistricting. Both of them are at NCSL, and they are joining us from Colorado. So welcome to both of you, and please begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. It is an absolute delight to be here with you. Ben and I do work on redistricting and elections. He primarily on the redistricting side of things, and he will do most of the presentation today. I did just want to make a couple of points before we turn it over to him. One is that, in case you don't know, NCSL is the nation's bipartisan organization supporting the work of legislators and legislative staff throughout the nation. And I want to emphasize that staff part too. We have the pleasure of working with Michael Stewart on a fairly regular basis. He helps show us how redistricting is actually done in a real state instead of the theoretical conversation we sometimes have on our own. So we appreciate his support and working with him. Our structure is bipartisan, but the work that we do is nonpartisan. And that work involves a variety of different things, but our favorite part of the work is when we can work with legislators and legislative staff directly, like we get the opportunity to do today. So we learned a lot from the earlier presentations, particularly the local perspective on what they need to do after redistricting and before those candidate filing deadlines. So we always benefit from that. But the bread and butter kind of function that we do is to respond to information requests that come from legislators or legislative staff. And I just want to be clear that when we do get those kinds of requests, we do handle them confidentially. So we're happy to support anyone in whatever their questions might be. Let's see, before we turn it over, I did want to make a few comments about the census. We were fortunate to hear what went on before, and I can tell you that we get to work with Mr. Whitehorn from the census on a fairly regular basis. He presents at most of our meetings, and he also speaks on behalf of redistrictors in the Census Bureau. So we really appreciate that while there's competing interests on how census data should be used, he always speaks up and says our needs are statutorily identified, and we appreciate that. In fact, this is my census pin, and he provided that to me at a previous meeting when we were together. So in terms of the census and redistricting, what I thought I could do is talk about what other states are thinking, and because these things might or might not be appropriate for Nevada as well. And the first thing I've been hearing is that states want certainty on when the data will be delivered. And today we learned that it's very likely, with an asterisk, but very likely that we'll have that data by April 1st. Now, I'm not quite sure why the difference from the statutory guideline for March 31st, moving it over to April 1st, but the point is we're back on schedule. Even so, a lot of states had done some things thinking that there would be delays. They've kind of delayed some of their timelines. And so I think we could expect to see special sessions this year. And I recognize what Mr. Gloria said about timelines, that the census is the start of the timelines. And if it's delayed, then everything down the road is delayed as well. The second concern I hear from states is about the quality of the data that will be provided. And there's always some question. There's no such thing as a perfect census, never has been. A couple of things that are on people's minds this year are whether the hard to count populations will be adequately counted. And that's in particular in regard to the reduced amount of non-response follow-up time in the field. But there's another thing that's a little more arcane, and that's called differential privacy. This is a statistical method for ensuring that everyone who responds to the census really does have their data kept secure, and that nothing can be re-identified after the fact. And that's a laudable and appropriate goal, but it's a little bit been framed up as if there's a conflict between data privacy and accuracy. And we could go into that in some more depth, but you can picture that if you would let all information about every person out, you'd have complete accuracy, but no privacy. And if you just said, Nevada's got, approximately so many people, then that's not very helpful data. The legislative leaders in Colorado and Utah have written to the Bureau expressing their concerns about differential privacy, and NCSL has done so also on behalf of the states in general. Happy to talk about this further at any point. I think at this point, the Bureau is doing what it can to make sure that the effects of this new process are minimized. But it does lead us into my third point, which is that I think it's likely we'll have more litigation on the census in this decade than we have in previous decades. And there's always been some litigation. I think there are myriad kinds of cases already in the works on a variety of different things. And I imagine that there will be additional ones on data privacy, on data accuracy. And that will mean more uncertainty about when you've got the data that you can go forward, and those questions about the timeline will just get all the more intense. And then my last point, I think you don't really need to hear, because I got to listen to you all talk about how you're doing the Get Out the Count effort in Nevada. Just reiterate that September 30th is the last day for people to respond. And I know you've put a lot of financial support as well as community support behind this. That's what I have on the census. If it's all right with you, we'll turn it right over to Ben to talk to you about redistricting, and then we'll take the questions, or if anyone has questions now, of course, I'm happy to take them now on the census stuff.
So go ahead and hear from Mr. Williams, and we'll take questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just give me one moment while I try to get this presentation up on the screen for you. And can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So as Wendy mentioned, I'm just going to be talking briefly about redistricting today. My understanding is that in previous meetings of this committee, you've gotten a background on redistricting before, so I apologize if some of this is repetitive, and I'll try to move through the topics which you may have heard before as quickly as possible, and try to give you an overview of the work that we do here at NCSL and what may be of interest to you in the future as you prepare to undergo redistricting next year. So the first thing to mention is, why do states care about redistricting, other than the fact that the US Constitution gives the power to redistrict to state legislatures? And I think the main reason is that since the 1960s, under the one person, one vote doctrine promulgated by the US Supreme Court, it's had to be done every 10 years following the completion of the census. Additionally, we've had federal laws on race and redistricting that are critically important to comply with, and sometimes are in conflict with one another. Those mainly include the Voting Rights Act and the racial gerrymandering doctrine found in the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And then I think it's also interesting for NCSL that states are diverse in how they approach this task. No two states are completely alike. Some may be similar, but every state is singular in exactly how it approaches redistricting. So going on that, redistricting models, there are endless options. And I think it's important to emphasize that if you as legislators or anyone else who may be watching is thinking about making changes to redistricting policy, it's important to look at a state's laws as a whole system that functions as one, not to focus on any individual parts. It's in some ways, it's analogous to a car. If you change the tires or if you put a different fuel in the tank, it runs slightly differently, even if overall, when you look at it at face value, it looks relatively similar. Every change makes some difference. Too far. So the issues that NCSL tracks in redistricting are primarily the map-making authority, criteria, the rules regarding public access and public input into redistricting, prisoner reallocation, which is sometimes referred to as prison gerrymandering, major litigation, and the outcomes of past cycles. And I'm going to address all of these in turn. In terms of map-making authority, who draws the lines? This is probably what gets the most attention in redistricting nowadays, and this is commonly a distinction between commission states and legislature states. And what does that mean exactly? Well, typically, as I have on the screen here, it means the states that have the primary authority to redistrict. So when 2021 comes around, who will get the first crack at drawing the lines? And so in the vast majority of states, as you'll see from this screen, the legislature has that responsibility. In 36 states, the legislature draws the state legislative plans, and in 41 states, the legislatures draw the congressional plans. And then in the commission states, it's 14 and 9 respectively. Now that's just primary authority. There are states that have commissions that serve as a backup role in the event that the legislature fails to draw the lines. Some examples of that would be Indiana and Texas have backup commissions. And then some states have advisory commissions, which don't have a primary or a backup role, but merely serve to advise the legislature on how the lines are drawn. Those are particularly prevalent in the Northeast and New England. They do exist somewhat in other states. Utah will be using an advisory commission for the first time in 2020, for example. But I think it's important to note that even though in terms of primary plans, only 36 states have the legislature drawing them, and in 41 states it's for congressional plans. Half of the states have some commission of some kind, whether a primary, a backup, or an advisory commission. So they are somewhat prevalent. And because of that, we have a lot of models around the country that give us an opportunity at NCSL to analyze their different policies and help shed light on those for our members who are interested in this topic. The other topic that we discuss frequently at NCSL is criteria. And these are the rules with which final maps must comply. So in Nevada, the criteria that are used are compactness, which is a measure of how tight a district is. That can be spatial or population, although typically in practice it's used as a spatial measure. Contiguity, which just means that there are no parts of the district that are wholly isolated from other parts. It is possible in theory to walk through the entire district. And then preservation of political subdivisions. That could mean cities and towns. Sometimes in state laws, it means county borders are meant to be kept whole. It can also mean in some cases that if you have roads, they're kept together. The preservations of the cores of prior districts, that means if you have a redistricting plan, you don't start anew in the new cycle. You start with the pre-existing map and you make tweaks from there. The logic behind that is typically continuity of representation. And then the last thing that is used in Nevada is avoiding pairing incumbents, which is a criterion that typically means that you cannot use redistricting as an opportunity to put two incumbents in the same district as one another. Or if it's not possible to do so, you do it as minimally as you can. And then there are some emerging criteria that have been adopted in some other states. They typically relate to the regulation of partisanship and redistricting. So some states have prohibitions on favoring or disfavoring incumbents, candidates, or parties. The wording varies, but in general, that's the catch-all way to describe it. A few states prohibit the use of partisan data. This actually comes into tension somewhat with the Voting Rights Act. So sometimes this is directly stated in statute, except where necessary to comply with the Voting Rights Act. A few states require that districts be competitive. Competitive can have multiple definitions. Sometimes competitiveness can mean each individual district has to be as close to 50-50 as possible, or it could mean that some districts will not be very competitive at all, but we were going to try to maximize the number of districts that are 50-50 and are closely divided. And then two states, Missouri is going to be using a principle called partisan symmetry for the first time in this upcoming cycle. And then Ohio is going to be using a proportionality requirement in this upcoming cycle. And those, while they are different, just to give you a general idea, they both relate to the idea of regulating the percentage of seats that a party will win based on its statewide vote share. Now, they function differently, but that's a general example. And I can go into that further in questions if you're interested. Another area that we spend a lot of time tracking is public access and input. So who else has a say in the redistricting process other than the legislators who are doing it or the commissioners who are drawing the lines? And so one common example is public map submissions. Is there a way for the public to submit a map to a state legislative portal? Is it just a definition of what that submitter considers to be his or her community of interest, or is it a statewide map? Have they taken the time to draw every single district in the entire state, whether for state house, state senate, or the US House? Public comment and testimony. This would typically mean that if the legislature proposed a plan, it would be put on a website somewhere or would be taken by a legislative committee around the state, and the public would have the opportunity to provide comments or feedback on the proposed plan. It sometimes could also mean that if members of the public were submitting plans, other members of the public could comment on those plans. So there are going to be a lot of comments, as you can see. The third one is public hearings and access. That can be as simple as what we're doing now, where we're having a hearing before a legislative committee. It could also involve a committee of legislators getting in the van together and driving around the state to have multiple hearings in multiple places to solicit feedback in individual regions. The fourth thing that we track generally is notice. Sometimes, well, I wouldn't say sometimes, but the default generally is that there is no requirement for extra notice for a redistricting plan, that you only have to provide as much notice before a committee vote on a redistricting plan as is required for all other bills. Some states require extra notice for redistricting plans. So if a legislative committee were to vote on marking up a plan and sending it to the floor, they would have to provide 2 weeks notice, for example, of that hearing date so that people could come in time and testify or prepare comments of their own. And then the last one is citizen initiated review. This is slightly different than the others. Generally what this means is that rather than anyone being able to file a lawsuit against a plan in any particular county or venue in the state, there's a delineated process in the state code or state constitution where a citizen within a certain number of days of a plan becoming law can file a petition at a state court, typically the state Supreme Court, for the justices or judges to review that plan for its compliance with state laws. And that is fairly common throughout the US. And as you can see on this right, this is a point that I really wanted to highlight for you. We have a screenshot from a website called Open Precincts. This is part of a network of open source web tools that have been created since the 2010 redistricting cycle that have enabled anyone with a web connection to be able to draw their own legally compliant plan and submit it to legislators if they want. And I bring this up to you because whether or not any state, Nevada or any other, has created a state system for soliciting public comment, tools like this exist now. And you as legislators who will be undergoing redistricting next year are almost certain to receive public comment created in tools like this. So it's just something that you should be aware of, and you might want to speak with counsel or speak with members of your legislative staff to see if there's a way to streamline the receipt, because these files tend to be quite large and it could be advantageous to you to have some system in place when it inevitably does come. So Mr. Whitehorn touched on this earlier, and this is something that has been done in the state of Nevada, so I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, but one thing that we do track is the growing number of states that will be reallocating prisoners from county jails and penitentiaries to their last known address prior to incarceration. Nevada is one of 9 states that currently does this. Then the next thing that we track is major litigation, and that means 2 primary things. The first thing it means is the cases throughout the past 50 years that have created the doctrines that shape redistricting law. That goes all the way back to the 1960s and the Warren Court cases that established redistricting as a justiciable issue at the US Supreme Court. And it goes all the way through till the partisan gerrymandering cases at the US Supreme Court that were decided in the past few years. And we have a webpage on that on our website, which I'd be happy to direct you to later, that has all of the case summaries for all of these cases. The second thing we do is we track significant challenges to maps that are drawn by state legislatures and commissions. And by significant, I mean cases that reach trial or are settled. And that's typically because there's a lot of litigation around redistricting. Some of it is well-founded and merited, and it makes it through because it has been properly drafted. Not all of it is. Sometimes someone brings a claim that has no basis or the law isn't applicable in a particular circumstance. We're not going to spend the time capturing that. We try to keep it clean for our members so that they only see the cases that are really getting to the core issues behind a map's creation. And then the third thing that we do is we compare the success of commission-drawn and legislatively drawn maps in courts. And by success, I mean the ability of those maps to survive legal challenges. Throughout the past few decades, we've tracked this issue. And in general, what we find is that commission maps and legislative maps survive at roughly the same rate. I mean, sometimes in one decade, commission-drawn maps might do slightly better. In some decades, legislative maps might do slightly better. But on the whole, if you average it out, it's roughly even. One important caveat I will make to that is that NCSL does not differentiate between the different types of commissions. And not all commissions are the same as the commission that's used in your neighbor, California. And so we don't have a comparison between the commissions that are similar to California versus legislative maps, or commission states like California and commission states that are not similar to California. This is a much broader overview. So the key takeaways that I would think that would be useful for you to have, and that is, first, legislatures still predominate in terms of drawing maps, but commissions are gaining ground. The number of commission states has gone up this decade. It's gone up in every previous decade, and I would expect it to go up again in the coming year. The second one is that when redistricting initiatives make it on the ballot, they pass 80% of the time. So the key hurdle typically to a redistricting initiative becoming law is whether it makes it onto the ballot at all. Because once it's on the ballot, they tend to pass. There are several redistricting initiatives on the ballot this fall, so that number may change slightly once we calculate the overall decade of the 2010s. But in general, 80% of the time they pass. And legislatures can take affirmative steps to shore up public confidence during the redistricting process. There are lots of ways we can do that, and I'd be happy to discuss that in the Q&A, but some examples are some states set up advisory commissions to help solicit public input and to give the legislature recommendations. Some states create portals that allow the public to submit maps, and then the legislative committee responsible for redistricting goes around the state and solicits public input. There are lots of steps that legislators can take, but this is a topic that's brought up to us frequently, and so we thought it would be important to include it in our takeaways. And with that, Madam Chair, I'm going to turn it back over to Wendy Underhill, who's going to offer some final thoughts.
Thank you, Ben. And I know that Ben stands ready to answer any questions people might have either now or later. But I thought I would do the public service announcement part of our presentation and tell you about the resources that NCSL can offer to you. And the first is Redistricting Law 2020. My copy is already quite beaten up. This is available free to legislators or legislative staff, and I think Michael Stewart may have some of those available for you. It was up to date as of a year ago. And it was things have changed since then, but not very much. So grab one of those. Michael also, I believe, provided some PDFs on our resources, so you can take a look at that. And then I want to say that we were planning on having a 3-day meeting in Las Vegas in May to do nothing but redistricting for people from throughout the nation. And you know what happened to that plan. So we were not able to enjoy your fabulous state. So I'm disappointed about that. And of course, we haven't been able to reschedule it either. Instead, what we did was put together a series of 12 webinars that sort of took all of the content that was going to be at that meeting and packaged it into digestible 1-hour chunks. So 12 hours sounds enormous. If you do it 1 hour at a time, it's not quite so bad. So that's one option for you. We are also planning another kind of an online event. We don't know what it's going to look like yet for January. So if any of you have particular things you'd like us to focus on during that, by all means, let us know what would be good content for that. And then the last thing I'll offer is that we have piloted in one state, which was New York, a state-specific training. And we did this online too. It was about 5 hours of content, and we had experts from around the nation, which we recorded, talking about some of the key points, such as public input, a little bit more in depth that's been mentioned, the federal and the state criteria also mentioned. Something we didn't talk about today is whether your maps will be scrutinized by outside people using statistical and sampling methodologies, and what does that mean? It's a good thing to be on top of as you go about it, because whatever maps you produce, somebody else is going to be measuring. And legislative privilege, which we also didn't cover today. So if you find as you go about preparing that it would be useful to go in more depth, we can provide not just the expertise that Ben and I have, but we can draw on experts from around the nation. With that, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I think we are done and happy to take any questions that you might have for us.
Very good. Thank you very much. And we'll open to questions from committee members. Anyone with a question, just please let me know who has a question, and we'll send it to either Wendy or to Ben. So any questions?
Chair?
Speaker Frierson, do you have a question?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Referencing back that 80% of the time, if there's a measure on the ballot creating a commission, it passes, but also appreciating that there are things that can be done to tell the story of transparency and inclusion that might mitigate that. Was the 20% where it didn't pass states that took some of those precautionary measures to reinstill confidence in the public that their process worked?
And I'm going to take that if that's all right with you, and then you can follow up if need be. Thank you for that question. One of those states was South Dakota, and the legislature put a lot of effort in, and it was a citizens initiative. So there's more than one way to get on the ballot, and it was a citizens initiative. So the legislature and others put effort into indicating that they could do an equally good job, that they represented every nook and cranny of the state, and that they had the expertise to be able to do this. And it was, that was, I want to say 2016, and that one went down. And then the last one from this decade that I can think of was in Ohio. And Ohio had tried a couple of times with some various measures. And in the end, there was going to be a citizens initiative put forward, and the legislature said, we're going to do something different. We're going to do it our way. And they created their own plan, two different plans, one for congressional and one for legislative redistricting, each one in a different year on the ballot this decade. And so the legislature kind of recognized that a citizens initiative was right there at the door, and they decided to redo it. And the way one of those has a commission that, or it has a system where the legislature does the redistricting first. And if they can get a majority of the minority party, or a significant part of the minority party to vote it up, as well as the majority party, then it goes into effect. If that doesn't happen, then it goes to a commission. And if the commission can't produce something with a substantial support from the minority party on the commission, it goes back to the legislature and they have a lesser bar. My point is, it sort of splits the difference between a commission and the legislature, and it came from the legislature.
And that was in Ohio?
Yes, happy to get you more information about that. And I realize I didn't really answer your question about whether states with better public input are able to avoid a commission. And I don't think I have information to support that one way or another. I think public input is sort of a coming thing. There's a few states, Utah being one, that did the map submissions in a fairly substantial way in 2010. And I'm guessing we're going to see more states going that way. So I can't really address exactly what you've asked.
Thank you. Any other committee members with questions? I don't see anyone or hear anyone, so want to extend our appreciation to Ms. Underhill and Mr. Williams for your presentations this morning. And I am sure we will be in touch with you as we go through this process. So again, thank you so much for joining us virtually this morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to agenda item number 8. And this is an overview of updated demographic estimates for 2020 and a demonstration of demographic maps and tables created from estimates. And we have our own Haley Prohl, who is our GIS expert from LCB's research division. So Haley, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Always a pleasure to present to this committee. My name is Haley Prohl. I'm the GIS analyst and redistricting GIS specialist with the research division of the Legislative Council Bureau. So today I'm going to talk about some 2020 population estimates that the research division has access to and some accompanying maps and tables that were created using these estimates and have since been made available on the redistricting website for Nevada. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the data and where it comes from, and then I'll walk through the new maps and tables on the redistricting website, including both PDF format maps and interactive maps. And so there was a document uploaded as meeting materials under this agenda item titled Overview of Updated Demographic Estimates for 2020, which includes information about the 2020 estimate data. And I am going to pull that up now and share my screen so everyone can follow along. And then I'll transition later to the redistricting website to show the maps and tables. So in preparation for the 2021 redistricting cycle, and while we wait for the release of the official 2020 census data, the research division has downloaded estimates from Esri's 2020 updated demographics dataset to use as a data source for some preparatory maps and tables that can provide insight into Nevada's population now. So the new maps and tables created from Esri's 2020 updated demographics dataset update the existing maps and tables on the Nevada Reapportionment and Redistricting 2021 website that were previously made with 2018 estimates. These estimates were from the American Community Survey, which is run by the US Census Bureau. Additionally, there are some new map products with the 2020 estimates that were not previously made with 2018 estimates. These include maps of race and Hispanic origin concentration in Nevada, as well as maps of predominant race and ethnicity by census block group in Nevada. So a little bit about the data. Esri is a geographic information system, or GIS, software company. It's the creator of the GIS software I use in my day-to-day work, and they produce these annual demographic data sets that are available through their software products or for purchase as standalone data sets for people who do not use GIS software. The demographic data sets are published every July for the current year estimates, and they use a variety of data sources, including the most recent US Census Bureau American Community Survey, administrative records, and private sources. So we chose to use Esri's 2020 updated demographics estimates as a data source to create preparatory maps and tables for a few reasons. The first, the estimates are available at the census block group level, which is necessary to be able to aggregate the data up to the legislative district level. So the Nevada State Demographer's Office has 2020 projections for age, sex, race, and ethnicity, but only at the county level, which cannot be reliably disaggregated down to the legislative district level. The estimates are also more current than the available American Community Survey or ACS estimates, which are currently only available for years 2018 and prior. The 2019 ACS estimates will not be available until December of this year. The estimates also use the same race and ethnicity classifications as the US Census Bureau, which will allow for comparison between ESRI data and the US Census Bureau data sets, such as the 2020 census or any American Community Survey estimates. And finally, ESRI's updated demographics estimates have been used by LCB staff before in 2009 to create preparatory maps and tables for the 2011 redistricting cycle. So for more information about the data, you can visit the link provided here in the document. I'm now going to go over the available maps and tables that use the 2020 estimates and are available on the 2021 redistricting website. They're listed on the bottom half of this document, but I'm going to walk through them on the website instead. So I'm going to reshare my screen to show the website. So I have navigated to the demographics tab of the Nevada Reapportionment and Redistricting 2021 website. To access our website, you can go to the homepage of the legislature's website and click on the link below the image of the legislative building. So first up, we have the population deviation maps with 2020 estimates. These were previously created with 2018 estimates. They're still on our website in the section below, titled Population Deviation Maps 2018 Estimates. So the 2020 versions should look familiar. However, they have slightly different projections from the 2018 estimate maps. So the population deviation maps show which legislative districts are projected to geographically expand or shrink during redistricting. So to find the population deviation for each district, first we must find the estimated ideal population. The ideal population is the total state population divided by the number of districts, since ideally each district will have the same number of people. So for the Nevada State Senate districts, the ideal population is the state population total divided by 21. And for the assembly districts, the ideal population is the state total divided by 42. So according to ESRI's 2020 population estimates, the estimated total state population is 3,129,748, which makes the Senate district population 149,036, and the ideal assembly district population 74,518. And I think I'm getting some messages that my screen is not shared properly, so I'm going to try to reshare my screen.
Haley, this is broadcast. If you can share the application and choose the just the browser that you're using, I think we might have better results.
Okay, let's see. Did that work?
1 second, we're checking all of the endpoints. Okay, we're good. You may proceed. Thank you.
Okay, so this map is just the population deviation map from the demographics tab of the reapportionment and redistricting website. I just clicked on the state Senate statewide map. So going back to the discussion around ideal population and population deviation, the estimated 2020 state total population was 3,129,748. So this ideal Senate district population is 149,000, and that ideal assembly district population is around 74,500. So districts that have an estimated population greater than their respective ideal population have too many people and will need to geographically shrink to include less people. These districts are shaded in green on the population deviation maps. Districts that have an estimated population lower than the ideal population will need to geographically expand to include more people, and these districts are shaded in blue. Districts that have a very small population deviation from about -1% to +1% are shaded in gray, and these districts may not change much geographically, if at all. And so these population deviation maps are also available in interactive format by clicking on View Interactive Demographic Maps from the demographics page. I already have this preloaded. And so the interactive maps provide a bit more information from the PDF maps when clicking on districts within the map. The pop-ups not only show the percent population deviation, but also the actual population deviation in the table below. You can easily toggle between the 2020 ESRI estimates and the 2018 American Community Survey estimates for a legislative district level to see the difference in projections across data sets. So going back to the demographics page, the next set of available maps with the 2020 estimates are the racial and Hispanic origin concentration maps. So the first 7 maps in the section titled Racial and Hispanic Origin Concentration Maps 2020 Estimates are maps that show the distribution of each race and ethnicity category in Nevada. The 6 race categories from the 2020 ESRI estimates that are also the race categories used by the US Census Bureau include American Indian or Alaska Native alone, Asian alone, Black or African American alone, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander alone, some other race alone, and white alone. So we only mapped the population of one race alone. We did not map the population that self-identifies as 2 or more races. And then Hispanic or Latino, as was discussed earlier by the US Census Bureau, that is considered an ethnicity, not a race. And so people of any race can identify as Hispanic or Latino. So these maps all look similar in layout and style. The distribution of each respective race or ethnicity is mapped using a gradual orange color scale. So darker orange colors indicate more population of the respective race or ethnicity in a census block, while lighter colors indicate a smaller population of the respective race or ethnicity. There are also some tables included in the maps. These summarize the race and ethnicity data by legislative district. So for this map, I'm looking at the American Indian or Alaska Native alone population, and these tables will sum by Assembly District and Senate District the number and percent of total for Native American Indian or Alaska Native population in each district. So the map displays race or ethnicity by census block group, but the tables will tabulate the data by district level. These maps are also available in interactive format by clicking on the View Interactive Demographic Maps from the Demographics tab and navigating to the second tab within the interactive web application titled Race and Hispanic Origin. So each of the race and ethnicity categories are listed in the side panel on the left, and clicking on one will open the map for that respective race or ethnicity in the case of Hispanic or Latino. Similar to the interactive population deviation maps, the interactive race and Hispanic origin maps do provide more detail than the PDF versions. If you are to click on a specific census block, it will tell you exactly the estimated number of people who self-identify as that race or ethnicity. So this pop-up reads, an estimated 693 people self-identify as American Indian or Alaska Native alone in this census block group. So this data would be very difficult and messy to display in a PDF map, but having an interactive map format allows us to easily provide this level of detail. There are another set of race and ethnicity maps that are available from the 2020 estimates. These are titled Predominant Race by Census Block Group and Predominant Ethnicity by Census Block Group. They are located at the bottom of the section titled Racial and Hispanic Origin Concentration Maps 2020 Estimates. So these maps show which race or ethnicity is most common for each of the census block groups in Nevada. Each race or ethnicity is symbolized by a different color. So this is the map of races in Nevada. It does not include Hispanic or Latino. That is a separate map. And the strength of the predominance for the majority race is symbolized by transparency. So darker colored census blocks indicate a higher relative strength of predominance for the majority race, while lighter colored census block groups indicate the majority race has just a slightly higher population than the other races. So for example, in this map, orange census block groups indicate that there are more people who identify as white alone than any other race. And the darker the orange, the stronger the relative majority they have over the other races. One thing to note about the ethnicity predominance map is there are really only two colors because both ESRI and the US Census Bureau really just have two categories for ethnicity. That is, you are either Hispanic or Latino or not Hispanic or Latino. Okay, and then the final products I'll go over that include the 2020 estimates are the population and race tables. They are available in the statistical information section. So these are updated versions of the 2018 tables, which still exist below the 2020 tables. These tables provide all the district population, race, and ethnicity population information that were included in the maps I just showed. They're kind of a one-stop shop for all the data in tabular format. And so the first page includes the estimated 2020 population total for each district, as well as the percent and actual population deviation. And the second page houses information about race and ethnicity for each district. And these tables are available for each of the 4 district types that the legislature is responsible for redistricting. So that includes congressional, state senate, state assembly, and the Nevada System of Higher Education Board of Regents. So in closing, I would just like to mention that ESRI's 2020 population estimates will be in the database with the redistricting software, so that example redistricting plans can be created prior to the release of the official redistricting data. Furthermore, all the maps and tables that I showed today will be updated once again with the official 2020 census data whenever we receive that, and they will be made widely available to legislators and the public to help aid in the formation of redistricting plans. And at that point, we will have more detailed maps on congressional and Board of Regents districts. Right now, our products have mainly focused on the state assembly, at least on the map side, they have focused on the state assembly and state Senate district levels. And finally, if there are any other map or table products that you think would be helpful to have using the 2020 demographic estimates, or even the 2018 ACS estimates for that matter, please feel free to reach out to myself or Kathleen Steinley in the research division. Our contact information is at the bottom of the Get Involved tab, and we are happy to look into making those products. So I will now take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, we will go to questions. So committee members, any questions for Ms. Prohl?
Madam Chair.
Yes, is that?
Senator Goycochea.
Oh, Senator Goycochea, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm just trying to get it clear in my mind. Now, we've got the estimates in place, and we're also talking about the numbers could and should be projected right now to be available April 1st, but I was under the impression the final numbers wouldn't be available until into July of 21. Can somebody kind of clarify that for me? Exactly what are we anticipating now at this point?
Haley Prohl, for the record, thanks for the question. I think that would be a better question for the Census Bureau on when their official statistics will be available. We only have control over when we are receiving these so-called estimates.
Thank you. I was just hoping you had a better feel for it than I did. Thank you.
Unfortunately, no.
Madam Chair?
Yes. Go ahead.
This is Wendy.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I might be able to help out on the question. The Census Bureau, for a longstanding number of years, has been required to provide the redistricting data by March 31st of the year after the census, which would be March 31st, 2021. The reason there's confusion is that the Bureau had requested of Congress a delay in having to turn in that information, and with the July 31st deadline instead of the April one. Congress never acted on that, and at this point the Census Bureau doesn't appear to continue to want that delay. So that brings us back to where we were with the original statutory deadline of March 31st, or maybe it's April 1st now. So it had to do with, the delay was based on COVID, that the Census Bureau couldn't get out in the field and do its work early on. So now it's doing its work in a kind of condensed format because it's chosen to not look for that extra delay. I hope that was helpful.
So we're looking at an April 1st deadline, whether it's doable or not. We don't at this point. Again, looking at some of the early numbers in some of the rural counties I represent, clearly the numbers, I don't know how I don't think we're gonna get them sold up that tight by the deadline by December 31st. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Speaker Frierson, do you have a question?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. In a practical sense, I'm just curious, line-wise, are we looking at, and this might be a question from Michael, maybe, I don't know. Are we looking at possibly doing a mock-up during next session, recognizing that we would have to tweak it once we get final numbers, whenever that is, presumably sometime early fall, to then subsequently finalize them. Well, I mean, is that kind of where we are? Does it look like we would have enough data to do a mock-up so that we're that much more prepared once we get to September or whenever the final deadline is, or date for census data?
Thank you, Speaker Frierson. Haley Prohl, for the record. I think, yes, these estimates, both the 2020 ESRI estimates that we recently downloaded, as well as any American Community Survey estimates. I know the 2019 ones are coming out in December. I think they could both help us create some mock-up redistricting plans to at least provide some insight. I don't know about using those, they could definitely be a good starting point, I would say. Yeah.
Madam Chair, this is Asher Killian, the Committee Counsel.
Go ahead, Mr. Killian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to expand upon that, I think we're kind of somewhere in between the vision I laid out at our last meeting for what happens if the data is delayed and our original vision for what happens if the data comes in on time. Based on the Census Bureau's presentation to us today, it sounds like the statutory requirement to have it to us by April 1st is still in effect, but they're not sure whether they'll be able to meet that or not, and are still planning to do additional work to figure out what their timeline is going to be. And so I think that the most prudent course for the legislature to plan on at the moment is kind of what was described during our last meeting, where we take whatever data we have during session, generate whatever plans we can generate, and whether that results in BDRs or not is maybe a lesser concern, because what the committees are going to need to consider is what the plans look like. And once we have final data to turn that into BDR form, we can do that. But I don't think that that's going to be the limitation on what the committees consider during session.
Thank you, Mr. Killian. Other questions or comments from committee members? Or Ms. Prohl or okay, I don't see any additional questions. A lot still yet to do. Okay, we will then move to agenda item number 9, which is an overview and discussion of previous joint standing rules regarding reapportionment and redistricting. And we will hear from our own Michael Stewart, Research Director, and also from the Legal Division, Asher Killian, our Senior Principal Deputy Legislative Counsel, and Samuel Quast, who is a Deputy Legislative Counsel. So gentlemen, we will let you begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, this is Michael Stewart, Research Director, and I've just attempted to share my screen. I hope you can see a Word document in front of you, and this is also in the exhibits as well, just showing the joint standing rules from the most recent redistricting session, which was 2011. Also in the exhibit lists are rules from 2001, which was the previous redistricting session, but we also had a sort of partial set of rules, kind of compressed set of rules that were on the books from 2015 and 2017 and 2019. I included those also in the exhibit list, but for the purposes of sort of laying out what is typically found in rules of the legislature for a redistricting session, I'll just quickly go through what we had in 2011. It does include approximately 7 rules. To start with, the rules highlight the responsibility of the measures. As you know, we have legislative operations and elections committees in the legislature, and those have been typically designated as the redistricting committees for the sessions, and that's set forth in the rules as well. The joint standing rules typically have a component concerning equality of representation. This is broken out by congressional districts, legislative districts. You'll see from 2011, there was a reference to the State Board of Education. In 2011, there was a bill to make the State Board of Education sort of hybrid, elected and appointed board. And those districts are now coterminous with congressional districts. So the legislature is no longer required or needed to compile districts for State Board of Ed, as they will be the same districts as congressional districts. However, we still do, as you know, draw lines for the Board of Regents. And so that equality of representation language would be remaining for the Board of Regents. And you would recall we heard from them at our last meeting. The rules also typically highlight the population database. And it's basically, we set forth in the rules that the population and defined subunits thereof, as determined by the census, must be the exclusive database for redistricting by the Nevada Legislature, and then as validated by the LCB staff, and to make that part of our database. And that is a sort of a GIS, more technical function. On Finally, and this is an important rule for you, so everything is as accurate as possible, that all district boundaries created by a redistricting plan must follow census geography. We also have a rule concerning the procedures for redistricting committees and those exemptions. This rule basically lays out a couple things. One, it sets forth that a legislator or a member of the public may present to the redistricting committees any plans or proposals relating to redistricting, including proposals for specific districts or the full, slate of districts as well. And this is an important consideration that actually Mr. Killian just touched on. This rule essentially allows the legislature to look at any number of plans without specifically having a BDR. So for example, if you were here in 2011, you recall that the committees on legislative operations and also in the committee of the whole actually heard several plans, and they were map sets and data sets that could then be later, if the legislature chose, turned into a bill draft request. And so that then flows into the next part of the rule that basically says that bill draft requests, including that set forth the specific boundaries and amendments affecting those boundaries, can only be requested by the chairs of those redistricting committees. That in no means means that other plans could not be considered, and in fact, in previous sessions, they have been. So we have also in the rule, it sets forth some of the limitations on the BDRs and says that those BDRs can be combined into one BDR, or of course, you can have separate bill draft requests for each plan, separate congressional, separate legislative, separate board of regents, which has been sort of the practice in the past 2 redistricting cycles. So, of course, we've heard a lot about this, but in compliance with the Voting Rights Act is extremely important. So there's a rule concerning that, that a redistricting committee will not consider a plan that the redistricting committee determines is a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And it will also not consider a plan that the redistricting committees determine is racially gerrymandered. Finally, there's been a lot of talk about public participation. The last 2 redistricting cycles, we've had specific rules concerning public participation. The rule basically specifies that the public shall be encouraged to participate in all aspects of reapportionment and redistricting, and the redistricting committee shall encourage the widest range of public input into the deliberations of those activities. Of course, notices must be transmitted to the public, and interested parties would be encouraged to appear before the redistricting committees to provide their input, and then reasonable opportunities must be provided. We had a rule that was added because of our advancing technology in 2021 concerning the video conferencing capabilities. And we kept in those rules the requirement in 2011 to hold at least 1 hearing in the southern part of the state and 1 hearing in the in the rural portion of the state during the session to allow the public to participate in various parts of Nevada. And then finally, the rules in 2011 provided the redistricting committee shall make available for review all by the public copies of all the maps prepared at the direction of the committees. Some of you will recall that we actually had a public map room, and that was both in 2001 and 2011. We had public workstations, which this committee approved the purchase of those workstations at our last meeting, and the Legislative Commission, by the way, did approve those. And then, as Haley showed too, this upcoming redistricting cycle, we've really beefed up and enhanced our redistricting website. So it's very, very robust now, and that can be a platform and a tool for the public to use as well for redistricting information during the session. And then I would note that there's nothing to prevent, and certainly Mr. Killian and Mr. Kwas can comment further, but I don't think there's anything to prevent you from adding to these rules if you wish. That might include methodologies for map submissions, given that our new technology. And I know many of you appreciate or seem to be expands of the nesting process that we have now, and that might be something that you may wish to include in the rules as well. And so certainly something to consider when this committee goes into its work session at our next meeting. And then finally, I would note that, historically, while this committee has recommended a set of rules at its final work session, and they are generally followed and approved at the next legislative session, it is ultimately up to the 2021 legislature to approve those rules. And so this committee would be in a position to just make recommendations for how those rules might look at the next session. That's kind of a quick rundown of what the rules were in 2011. I think I'll probably at this point just want to turn it over to Mr. Killian and Mr. Quast to see if they have any further additions. We wanted to make sure that they were on the agenda as well, if there's any questions or if they have further additions from a legal perspective. So I'll turn it over to them, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Asher
Hear
Killian.
from Mr. Killian and Mr. Quast, whatever you have to share.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think one of the most important things I wanted to emphasize that kind of came at the end of Michael's presentation there was if the only redistricting cycle you're familiar with is the one that happened in 2011, then you may have noticed that when that went to the courts developed their own set of rules for what redistricting principles to apply. And that's kind of what was referenced in NCSL's presentation on what rules apply here in Nevada. That wouldn't ordinarily be the case. Ordinarily, it's in these rules that the legislature adopts for itself that the legislature sets what redistricting principles will apply. And ultimately, when maps potentially get challenged in court, the reference back to what the guiding principles are meant to be would be these rules adopted by the legislature. And so just to add a point of emphasis, if the nesting of districts is important to the legislature, and it's one of the factors that the legislature wants to consider in drawing these maps, it would probably be a good idea to include that in the rules, even though it hasn't been included in the rules in the past. So that when the maps are potentially challenged in the future and we're having to mount a defense of the maps, we could refer back to that and use that to undergird the defensibility of the maps. And then the only other point I was going to comment on was Michael had mentioned the difference between presentations of maps and plans and BDR requests. Historically, there's been a very high overhead for the legal division to actually prepare a BDR from a set of maps. And as we had talked about in previous meetings, we're attempting to use technological advances to make that a much quicker process in the legal division this time around. But that's the reason for the limitation on BDR requests versus presentation of maps, is just that you could very quickly overload your legal division in the past with BDR requests, and presentations of maps and plans is much quicker and easier. So to the extent there are any questions on any of those provisions, I'd be happy to help.
Thank you. Any questions from committee members?
Madam Chair, if I can ask a quick question?
Yes, Speaker Frierson, go ahead.
Thank you. I froze up for a second, and so I think I lost part of it. The part where you were indicating that we haven't ever incorporated something into the rules before and might want to consider it. Could you go over that again?
Sure thing, Mr. Speaker. This is Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. In the past, the legislature had not incorporated the concept of nesting districts into the rules. That was a creation of the court during the court drawing process in 2011. And if that's a thing that the legislature wants to retain and wants to be a point of emphasis in the 2020 redistricting cycle, as was kind of emphasized by the local governments earlier today, then that's something that we should include in the rules so that we can then fall back on that and use that to defend the plans in the future if they're challenged, that's one of the redistricting principles that the legislature specifically put forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the public participation. And I'm sure you've already thought about this. I don't know if it needs to be in the joint rules when we come to the point of working on them, but if if the pandemic continues and we're still under the virtual situation that we are presently, and I guess maybe it's just something to think of at this point, should we put something under the rule regarding public participation on how we can reach out to our communities who have interested in this in order for them to participate, be a part of it, when it might be difficult or impossible for them to come to a meeting and give their input on some maps that have been prepared. So it's just kind of a rhetorical question at this point, but maybe we should be thinking on that as well.
Madam Chair, this is Michael Stewart. This might sort of tie into the broader question of what the legislature might even look like in the 2021 session in terms of how we engage the public and engage our witnesses, engage our speakers, and that sort of thing across the board for the legislature. I think that's still a little bit of an unknown, but I think it's safe to say that if there is a situation where we're still utilizing some virtual technology for our proceedings, that would most likely it would certainly apply to our proceedings by the redistricting committees as well. So I don't know if Mr. Killian has something to add, but that's just sort of my take on probably what would happen if we end up moving forward in the pandemic sort of mode that we're in right now.
And Madam Chair, the only thing I would add to that is you probably recall in the most recent special session, the legislature passed AB 2, which kind of revised the rules to allow for remote meetings during the interim. And there was also a first pass at the revision to the rules of both the Assembly and the Senate to incorporate similar provisions in those rules to allow for remote participation during the special sessions. My guess is if we're in a similar situation when the 2021 regular session rolls around, whatever version of those mechanics is included in the rules generally, we could also duplicate for the rules specifically regarding redistricting.
Very good. Thank you very much. Committee members, any other questions on this agenda item? I do not see any more. Thank you, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Killian, and Mr. Quast. We appreciate you being here. And our next agenda item is number 10, and this is a discussion of future meeting dates, potential agenda topics, and work session items. So at this point, unless there's anything that the committee members want to add regarding agenda items or work session items, we will be having a fourth meeting. And at this point, we are looking at that meeting occurring in mid-October, probably around October 19th, 20th, or 21st, and staff will be getting in touch with you. So I just wanted to give you those dates today so that when you do get that call or that email, you'll be able to check in with what works for you and what does not work. But those are the three dates that we're looking at this point for our final and fourth meeting. So any other questions or comments on this agenda item? I think we've collected some thoughts as we went through our meeting today, and those will be good. Thank you. Okay, I don't see anything. So agenda item number 11 is public comment. This is our final period of public comment for today. So we're going to take 3 minutes or 2 to 3 minutes to give our BPS staff a few minutes to give members of the public a chance to call in. And again, for anyone listening, that number is 669-900-6833. And then use the reference number, ID number of 922-6515-7439, followed by the pound sign. So let's take 3 minutes and we'll let BPS open up the public comment line, and I'll ask the members not to go far. And we will do public comment in just a few minutes. So it is 12:54. So let's aim for 12:57. Okay, let's see if we have anyone in the public comment queue for public comment for this committee. So BPS, do we have anyone for public comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. So members, do you have any further comments before we adjourn this meeting? Seeing none, since there is no further business to come before us today, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.